After a brutal exhibition assault, Sakamoto, Nagumo, and Yuzuki become priority targets of the Reformed Order. Meanwhile, Yuzuki tries to destroy the rest of the JAA using his new personality, considered the most lethal assassin in history, Takamura. As the Order's current leader returns from his overseas assignment, how will Sakamoto and Nagumo survive with the bounties on their heads? Let's find out. We see Oki being firm in correcting what is wrong in the name of the Order. When Shishiba looked at the photographs, he thought their leader was truly a real nutjob. Meanwhile, Kamahati became honest and said it wouldn't be easy because he's got the former top assassin of the industry, the master of disguise, and the worst terrorist in JAA history. However, as Oki had mentioned earlier, he wasn't expecting much from them. Therefore, he had recruited 2 more new Order members and wanted them to meet these people. He invited them to come along. They were surprised when he led them to a pachinko shop. The singer outside caught Osaragi's attention. When Shishiba told her they were going inside, she couldn't take her eyes off the man playing guitar and singing. So, Shishiba went inside and left her there outside. He thought this was unusual, as she rarely stopped for such things. Meanwhile, they showed a man playing at the slot machine. Oki approached him and asked if he had won yet, calling him Torres. Torres replied that Oki shouldn't talk to him right now. He had only hit 1 jackpot that day, even though he had been rolling since 9. He became annoyed as he missed again. Shishiba was puzzled when he saw him, wondering what was special about him, since he looked like a plain old gambling addict. When Oki asked Torres about their discussion regarding joining the Order, he replied that he would do it since he couldn't refuse anyway. After all, he owed 60.2 billion yen. Oki was shocked because it was 400 million more than last month. Torres responded that he had lost 300 million on boat races and spent the other 100 million. Kamahati commented that any jerk who keeps piling up debt is trash. He said if you asked him, Torres should work and pay it off. Shishiba walked out, calling it stupid, and told Oki he was leaving. But Torres stopped him and called him young man. When Shishiba asked why, Torres requested to borrow money before he left. Even just 20 million. Shishiba looked at him, then struck him with his hammer on the nape. However, he was surprised to see that the end of his hammer was destroyed. Upon closer inspection, his hammer didn't simply broke, but was actually chipped away. Torres then clarified that he only works enough to pay the interest. However, living and killing costs money, which is why his debt keeps increasing. Shishiba remarked that it indeed seemed like a problem. When Oki asked for his opinion and if he was impressed, Shishiba just said fine. While Torres was still playing, he asked where the other one was. They went outside and noticed Osaragi was still there. When he asked if she was still listening, she just said that this guy's song is amazing and she's getting a sad vibe from it. The guitarist twitched at what she said and strummed his instrument forcefully. This startled Osaragi, causing her to fall. The man lowered his hat and said she didn't understand his song at all. That song was about the bliss he felt when he first killed someone. That man was Tanabata. Oki introduced him as a professional musician whose songs were inspired by killing. As Tanabata was packing up, Kamahati called him a jerk for what he did to his poor and sweet Osaragi. Shishiba looked on as Osaragi suddenly grabbed Tanabata's clothes. She said that was extremely loud. He should show respect, she added, calling him a newbie. He apologized to her, but said it was difficult for him to handle what she said. Torres then came out, and now that everyone was acquainted, Oki announced that they were now 6 in the Order. Their mission was to exterminate 3 targets, Sakamoto, Nagumo, and X. It no longer mattered if they were their colleagues. If they disturbed the Order, then they should kill them without hesitation. Now, it was time to work. Meanwhile at Mia Clinic, while Sakamoto was eating cup noodles, he became worried when he suddenly remembered something. He asked his companions what day it was. Shin, who was massaging Granny Mia, answered that it was September 26. Sakamoto broke into a sweat when he heard this, which made Shin and Lu wonder. Sakamoto shouted that it was his only daughter Hannah's birthday. The two were very surprised by this. Sakamoto fell to his knees saying he needed to buy a cake, but Shin said they could go instead. He refused, saying he wanted to be the one to hand it over and hear his daughter say thank you. However, Granny Mia didn't allow him. saying he couldn't leave there today. While lying down, Nagumo chimed in and suggested why not disguise himself, which surprised Sakamoto. Nagumo added that he wanted to come along since he was tired of just being there doing nothing. At Ikarizaka Shopping Arcade, the three men was shown in their disguise. Nagumo had become fat, Shin wore glasses, and Sakamoto had transformed into a woman. While walking, Shin wondered why despite the many JAA members in the area, they weren't being noticed. Nagumo said that of course it was because he was the one who created their disguises. When Shin asked how long it would last, he replied about 30 minutes. He suddenly became curious about how Nagumo had become fat. After Sakamoto bought the cake for his daughter, Shin said now they just needed to give it to Hana and their mission would be complete. Nagumo requested that while they were there, he wanted to stop by the arcade. Shin didn't agree because they were out of time, suggesting another day instead. However, Nagumo said that if he won a stuffed animal for Hana, it might make her happy. Sakamoto agreed with that, but Shin pleaded with him not to fall for his trick. Nevertheless, he couldn't do anything about it. When the two were about to play, someone suddenly bumped into Shin. It was Shishiba along with other order members. He wondered what they were doing there. Sakamoto told Shin in his mind not to react, while Nagumo told Shin to keep calm as the slightest change in expression could give them away. However, after they passed by, Torres pondered about what he had seen. Torres looked at the three, and so Oki asked what was going on. He also became thoughtful when he saw them. Nagumo recognized him and was surprised that he had returned from abroad. Shin broke into a nervous sweat, wondering if they had recognized them, but Sakamoto said not to stop. Oki then mentioned that she looked like Sakamoto's wife, recognizing her from some documents. Sakamoto looked at him and asked how she could help. Oki introduced himself as one of her husband's former colleagues. When asked if she knew anything about her husband's whereabouts, she replied that she didn't, saying they had a pretty lax relationship. Torres became annoyed at this, saying it would be faster if they just kidnapped Sakamoto's wife. The three didn't know what to do about this statement. However, Oki said that wasn't allowed. Based on JAA policy, under no circumstances shall a civilian be intentionally harmed. So, he turned around and invited Torres to leave. But Torres asked whether policies weren't just there to maintain order. Who cared about a civilian or two? Sakamoto was visibly irritated by what he heard, making Shin think that he needed to calm down. However, because of this, Shin suddenly transformed back to his normal look, which worried them. The order members turned to look at them. Torres then approached Shin and grabbed his shoulder. But Nagumo, who had also returned to normal, suddenly kneed him in the face. He urged them to leave, while Shishiba couldn't respond immediately. Sakamoto pulled Shin, and the three ran away. With his rifle aimed, Kamahati was surprised to see Sakamoto and asked if he should shoot. Oki didn't allow it because there were too many obstructions. Firearms would be a disadvantage in this situation, so they should leave it to Tanabata. He suddenly took out his guitar and tuned it. When he mentioned G-sharp, his guitar cable suddenly went through a manhole cover. When he strummed the strings, something could be seen traveling through the tunnel, following the three's escape route. When Sakamoto stepped on the next manhole cover, he was suddenly hit as the hole burst and the cover flew off. Though thrown off balance, Sakamoto still managed to land properly. He wondered what that sound was since it wasn't a bomb. He was curious about how the enemy was attacking. Tanabata held his guitar cable and used it to attack Sakamoto, who quickly blocked his face with his arms. The cable pierced through him, which made him think. When Tanabata played the guitar keys, Sakamoto suddenly felt something strange in his body. The sound was reverberating in his head. He was still holding the cake for Hana, which he was desperately trying not to drop. However, Tanabata said it looked like he was having trouble moving. He asked if something was holding him back. Sakamoto just told him to shut up, but in his mind, he thought Hana's cake would be ruined if this continued. He started to wobble, and Tanabata said he understood what he was feeling. He wanted to write 5 new songs for his tour next year, but nothing was coming to him at all. In times like these, he said it was better to refresh himself. He added that what helped his creativity was the moment when someone dies. Osaragi and Kamahati charged at Sakamoto simultaneously. Osaragi pulled out her buzzsaw, while Kamahati aimed his rifle at him. Nagumo was worried for him, but Shin blocked his way. Sakamoto was surprised by this action, but Shin just raised his hands and commanded them to stop by using his mind. The two were startled, and something seemed to happen when he stared at them. They suddenly stopped and fell to the ground. Osaragi fell onto Kamahati, who noticed that she smelled nice. Meanwhile, the three suddenly disappeared. When Torres asked if they should chase after them, Oki said no. He explained that unplanned battles tend to result in accidents. But that aside, he couldn't believe they didn't even greet him. Meanwhile, Shishiba remained quiet in the background. The three ran quickly and escaped. While running, Nagumo told Sakamoto that he should show some gratitude to Shin, as he almost died right on Hana's birthday. When Sakamoto asked how he did that, he replied that he honestly didn't know either. He thought it was like telepathy. When he forcefully commands someone to stop, for just a moment, it seems to rewire their thoughts. Shin was surprised when Nagumo asked if this ability didn't negatively affect him. He said it sounded too convenient. So, he wondered if there were any risks involved. Shin asked what he meant. For example, what if he lost 1 year of his life every time he used it? Shin told him to stop, saying he would start believing that. Sakamoto suddenly became puzzled when he noticed there was no sign of JAA outside their shop. He said this was their chance to give the cake to Hana. He looked at what he was carrying, and concern was evident when he peeked inside. The cake inside was completely ruined. It was already night, and inside you could see Hana, her mother, and Lu looking happy. Sakamoto was just watching from the adjacent building. He couldn't help but tear up because of what happened. While eating cake, Nagumo told him he should go and meet her, but he replied that the cake was ruined, so he couldn't just show up. When Nagumo asked what their plan was now since the order would attack again, Sakamoto couldn't answer immediately. He said he fought to protect his family and the life they built together. But now, he was the one putting his family in danger. Maybe he wasn't meant to be there. While enjoying his cake with great satisfaction, Nagumo didn't seem surprised by what Sakamoto said, which puzzled Sakamoto. According to him, they were both wanted now. But actually, Sakamoto himself was already wanted to begin with. They had been labeled as X's conspirators in the terrorist attack at the museum. So there was no turning back now. At any moment, the order could come and pursue them, just like what happened this morning. Sakamoto was annoyed by this realization. However, Nagumo added that he could have just backed off since he had already given a warning. Nevertheless, he chose to continue. Sakamoto retorted not to lecture him since he's one to talk. Sakamoto pondered what he could do now. Nagumo asked if it isn't obvious. He said there were only two choices left if he wanted to survive. First, kill X and prove his innocence to the JAA, or alternatively, destroy the JAA itself. It was one or the other, he said. However, whichever he chose, death would be unavoidable. Sakamoto wondered how it had come to this. While walking lost in thought, he happened to be noticed by Nakatsugawa, a JAA member who was outside. When his companion asked what's up, he questioned if that wasn't Sakamoto walking by. When they realized it was indeed him, and he seemed indifferent to what was happening, they saw it as their chance to catch him. The two rushed forward together, while Sakamoto continued walking. He was just thinking about how he wanted to live in peace. However, even with his deep thoughts, he still managed to take down the two. He punched one in the cheek, while kneeing the other in the stomach. Sakamoto recalled that everything started when a cow put a 1 billion yen bounty on his head. Because of that, he was pulled back into that world. He commented that a cow was really forceful, even in death. He continued walking while the two had fallen. In any case, Sakamoto wanted to talk to his wife, Aoi. He went straight to their store, and Aoi just sighed while at the counter. Sakamoto hid and thought about what he should say to her. One thing he considered saying was that it might be better for him to leave, but that sounded irresponsible. Suddenly, a worried-looking Aoi spoke up. She said that when Taro returns, she would need to talk to him about it. Sakamoto heard this and became curious about what she meant. There was a JAA member behind him who noticed him and wanted to kill him. Nevertheless, he managed to get him in a headlock even though his mind and eyes were focused only on his wife. He was worried that maybe she wanted to divorce him because he was such a loser. But Aoi just scratched her head and said that what was bothering her was that they were in the red again this month. She was worried that if this continued, they would need to close the store. Sakamoto was extremely shocked when he heard this, and so Sakamoto came out and showed himself to her. He asked his wife what she was saying. Aoi was shocked that he was there and welcomed him back. When Sakamoto asked about closing the store, Aoi explained that for a while now, more assassins had been coming there. As a result, their regular customers were scared, causing their sales to decline. Additionally, they were struggling to compete now that more big chain convenience stores were opening around the train station, and it's difficult for a privately owned shop like theirs to compete. She apologized to Sakamoto, knowing he had a lot going on now. But Sakamoto replied that he should be the one apologizing because he hadn't realized this. After thinking for a moment, Sakamoto told his wife that maybe it was time for them to move somewhere safer. Aoi was surprised by this and said she didn't want to let go of that shop. She explained that they had started the shop together, and it was full of memories of their struggles and joys. Sakamoto then realized that Aoi was right about that. He remembered the reason why he started that shop. Flashing back to when they were young, Aoi had asked if his interview hadn't gone well. Sakamoto said yes, that perhaps he wasn't suited for that world. Aoi disagreed with that. Suddenly, she got distracted when she saw the place where Sakamoto had brought her. She was curious if he lived there, and he said yes on the second floor. He explained that it was supposed to be demolished, so they allowed him to just use it. Aoi had no idea about his situation. Upon entering, Aoi asked if nobody was using the first floor. Sakamoto mentioned that he occasionally worked out there. Aoi then had an idea for that space. She suggested they could open a shop there, a local store for the people living in that neighborhood. She said they would just create a place where he belonged. From that idea, they gradually began fixing it up. The couple rebuilt the entire place until it became a fully functional store. Fast forward several years, they had a child, and their family grew even larger when Shin, Lu, and Heisuki arrived. Back in the present, Sakamoto just stared at his wife, while Aoi apologized, thinking she was making things harder. However, Sakamoto thanked her. He said he didn't want to lose that shop either because they built it together, a place where he belonged. Sakamoto returned to Mia Clinic, surprising Shin and the others. Heisuki commented that he shouldn't be out and about. Shin then became curious about what he was doing. He had gone straight to the laptop, seemingly intent on something. Sakamoto Googled about franchising, and Shin asked him about it. Sakamoto questioned him back about how many JAA branches there were in Japan. Shin thought about it and guessed 13, but Wutong, who was behind him, answered that there were 37 in Japan and 4 overseas. He added that the number doubled if they counted affiliated companies. He wondered why Sakamoto asked, but Sakamoto continued asking if these were in cities. Of course, Wutong answered. More people meant more assassination requests. Shin couldn't understand what he was planning to do, but Sakamoto said he now knew what he needed to do. He remembered his conversation with his wife earlier about how they built their shop. His idea was to take over the JAA and turn Sakamoto's into a national chain store. Everyone was shocked by what he said. They asked if he had suffered brain damage from fighting the order. Heisuki advised that maybe he just needed more sleep. Wutong added that it was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. However, Granny Mia supported him. She said assassins should have balls. Sakamoto was serious about what he said, and just as he was about to explain his plan, the JAA news suddenly appeared on TV. The news reported that there had been a major terrorist attack on a JAA-owned weapons factory. Everyone watched and wondered. The anchor reported that X and his gang were suspected to be behind the attack. Currently, an intense battle was taking place on site. The casualties were still unknown, and floaters were evacuating local residents from the area. In the live coverage, X could be seen on top of a building holding a sword, while an explosion occurred in the area. Inside, someone from JAA HQ was radioing in. They were requesting updates from Base 06, but there was no response. Everyone at the base was lying bloodied on the floor. Kanaguri was there, holding his video camera. He said it was gruesome and unbelievable. X's posture and movements showed Takamura's persona. He was just standing with his head bowed while muttering. When X returned from the museum and Kanaguri heard that he had taken on Takamura's identity, he couldn't fully believe it. But that behavior and fighting skills were exactly like Takamura's. Akira was feeling nauseous from what she witnessed, so Kanaguri checked on her. He said he had told her not to come, but Akira replied that she was okay. However, more importantly, she said they needed to stop X because he was way out of line. But Kanaguri thought that wasn't possible. X was now the most lethal assassin in JAA history. This was also a test to observe what he was capable of. But he's more than proven his capabilities. X continued muttering incomprehensible words when Kumanomi ran toward him. She excitedly called X K. She was amazed at what he's done. She had worried because X was injured, but he still managed to take everyone down like it was nothing. Now, even though Gaku and Haruma were gone, the two of them would be enough. X muttered again while Kanaguri kept recording the video. Kumanomi didn't understand what he said, so she asked K. However, X suddenly sliced off her robotic arm, which confused Kumanomi. X's aura was completely different now, and even Kanaguri, who was recording, couldn't believe it. Takamura was now beyond X's control. Kumanomi could do nothing but call him K when he attacked again. He used his sword to slash her, but fortunately, Akira pulled her down quickly, resulting in only Kumanomi's hair being cut. Akira was in serious mode because she wanted to stop X. Meanwhile, Kanaguri was delighted, calling Akira's action cool. He was happy with the shot he got, and said that a lovely young girl risked her life to save others. He was overjoyed that she entered the scene. Kumanomi couldn't believe what Kei had done to her and asked why. Why would he try to kill her? She questioned. Akira thought that X still didn't have total control over Takamura's personality. Kumanomi couldn't believe it because Kei wouldn't attack her since they were family. She started sweating and wondered if she had done something to anger him. Kumanomi then wondered what to do. Because of this, Akira convinced her that they should leave, or they would be in danger. Kumanomi just told her to shut up and said that Kei wasn't like this before she showed up. She grabbed Akira by her clothes and demanded that she bring back the old Kei. Akira became worried when she realized this was bad, as Kumanomi was panicking. She called out to Kanaguri and asked for help with Kumanomi. However, he just signaled her to be quiet. As he had said, she was the lead and he was the director. That was their relationship, so she shouldn't approach him for help. He said that a heroine should be able to overcome any crisis with wisdom, cleverness, and love. If she was their heroine, he wanted to see how she would handle this situation on her own. Akira became troubled by this. She looked at the panicking Kumanomi and thought about what she could do now. In X's current state, he would surely kill them. The scene shifted to inside X's mind, where Takamura was sitting alone on a wooden chair, head bowed. Ryan Akao suddenly appeared smoking and slashed at the seated Takamura from behind. When X opened his eyes, his sword was already pointed at Akira. She sighed in relief, saying that was close. Ryan's personality returned to X's body, calling him K. She couldn't believe he had brought such a real doozy of a roommate into his mind, referring to Takamura. Akira was shocked when she realized she was facing her Aunt Ryan. Kanaguri watched quietly, noticing that Ryan Akao's personality had taken over. Kumanomi was annoyed and fed up with X's different personalities. She couldn't accept what was happening to X, who had dropped his weapon. Out of frustration, she used her electromagnetic ability to draw metal debris from the surroundings. She shouted and demanded they bring back their K. However, she was suddenly slapped and told to shut up. It was Ryan in X's body. The slap was so powerful that it sent her flying to the other side of the area. X suddenly called out to Akira and told her to leave the place immediately. She said K could no longer control the old geezer inside him. She told her to listen carefully as she explained that they were just figments of K's memories. This made Akira ponder what she had said. Ryan clarified that K remembered old geezer Takamura as an out-of-control killing machine. That was all he knew about old man Takamura. Therefore, he could only replicate the rampaging killer who killed both friends and enemies alike. Akira was confused by what she was saying and wondered about her. Ryan said that she was nothing more than K's memories of Ryan Akao. Akira couldn't accept this and said she was lying. If that was true, she asked, then how could she know her when she hadn't even met X yet? The Ryan personality inside X fell silent before saying that she always told K stories about her. Akira's eyes widened when she heard this and asked what that meant. She was curious about what kind of relationship the two of them had. Ryan just fell silent with a smile, remembering the past. X, also known as Yuzuki, had a flashback when Kandaka suddenly collapsed in front of him after inhaling poison. Yuzuki immediately ran away that time. However, Ryan chased after him. She caught up to him and restrained him using a chokehold. Because of this, she pinned him to the ground and held a gun to his head. Ryan told him that Kandaka was dead because he had dropped the antidote. When she asked if he did it intentionally, he answered yes. When Ryan asked why, he admitted that he had no choice and had to do it. He suddenly stood up and used his sword whip against Ryan, but she dodged. She became annoyed at his actions and asked if he really thinks he can defeat her, while calling him a gloomy loser. The two fought, but later, when Yuzuki was lying on the ground, Ryan was just sitting nearby, watching him. Yuzuki asked if she wasn't going to kill him. Ryan replied that was indeed the reason why she chased him. However, she felt there was more to the story. She became curious about his statement that he had no choice but to kill Kandaka. Yuzuki remained silent while lying down, before saying that his family was being held hostage. He sat up when Ryan asked for more explanation about his family's hostage situation. Yuzuki clarified that if he didn't kill Kandaka, they might kill Gaku. He explained that Gaku was only 13 years old and was like a younger brother to him. Ryan was shocked about hearing his age, commenting that Gaku's just a kid. She then asked who would do such a thing. Yuzuki explained that he grew up in a facility that raised orphans to become assassins. They were weapons of the JAA, and they weren't allowed to live lives of their own. The man running the orphanage, Asaki, forced them to carry out unthinkable missions and kill people they didn't want to kill. Ryan couldn't believe the revelation she heard from him. Meanwhile, several men could be heard arriving at their location. These men surrounded them and ordered them not to move. With hands raised, Ryan asked who they were. One of them said that both she and Yuzuki were under arrest on suspicion of killing Kandaka. Ryan was extremely shocked that she was included in this. Yuzuki insisted that Ryan had nothing to do with it. With guns pointed at them, the man said that if she was innocent, she should just come with them and not cause any more problems. If they resisted even slightly, they would be killed. Yuzuki just said okay, while Ryan looked at him and called for his attention. She thought that when JA arrests someone, they'll kill them. However, Yuzuki just said it was fine. He walked closer and said that all this time, he had never felt alive. Behind him, Ryan remained quiet and closed her eyes. As Yuzuki surrendered to the JAA member and was asked to place his hands behind his back, it seemed Ryan had a plan. Another JAA member pointed a gun at her and ordered her to put her hands behind her back as well. However, she suddenly struck the man, causing him to drop his gun. Ryan then aimed her weapon at the other JAA members there and shot at them. She managed to take down the men who were trying to arrest them, which shocked Yuzuki. As they ran away, he asked her why she did that. Why did she save him? Because of this, he said, the JA would surely hunt her down too. Ryan was leading the way as they ran, and Yuzuki told her it wasn't too late. She could still return to the JCC. He asked why was she bothering with him. Ryan replied that there was no particular reason. She said she also had a family she left behind that she wanted to protect. That's why she understood him. Besides, she added, he didn't seem like a bad guy to her. Yuzuki stopped running upon hearing her words and began to tear up. Later on, the two hid in a parked car in a nearby neighborhood. Yuzuki expressed that he needed to return to Alkmaar, the orphanage he mentioned. To which Ryan said she understood that he was worried about his family, but if he returned, the same things would just keep happening over and over. However, Yuzuki replied that if he didn't go back, others might get hurt. Ryan responded with fine and said they would just have to think of a way to free his family. She added that he could pay her back with a carton of cigarettes. Yuzuki was surprised by her words and said he didn't want her to get involved. He said she didn't know how horrible Asaki was. But while walking, Ryan just told him not to worry about her, calling him a wimp. Besides, she added, she was already involved. This made Yuzuki apologize to her. The two traveled together, with Ryan saying they would think about it while they skedaddled. She then asked if there was anywhere Yuzuki wanted to go. He couldn't believe how relaxed she was, saying JAA members could catch up to them anytime. Ryan called him boring because he didn't know how to have fun. Yuzuki replied that he had never been anywhere but Alkmaar and JCC. Ryan suddenly stopped the car, and when Yuzuki asked why and where she was going, she answered that she was just going to buy cigarettes. Yuzuki was concerned because they weren't supposed to be seen by people. Nevertheless, Ryan went straight inside to make her purchase. Upon returning, Ryan showed that she had also bought breakfast for both of them. They thoroughly enjoyed their food. After eating, they hung out in the car and talked. Ryan recalled how disgusting the cafeteria at JCC was. Yuzuki said that all cafeterias run by JAA are gross. He shared a theory that assassins are always under extreme stress, which is why their sense of taste is totally out of whack, but Ryan couldn't believe this. They then traveled and regretted that there were no convenience stores at any JAA branches, to which he explained that regular companies don't do business with the assassin world. This made Ryan comment that he was a real downer. They drove to a gas station, but Ryan admitted she didn't know how to fill up the tank, and so Yuzuki tried to figure out how to do it. However, Ryan suggested they just abandon the car there. During their stopover, Ryan realized she was running out of money. Yuzuki checked the items in the back of the car and suggested they sell something. While on the road, they were eventually caught up to and found. As bullets flew at them, Ryan thought they could steal their pursuer's car and sell it to survive on that money. They just enjoyed that road trip. X or Yuzuki said they just kept running without any particular destination. Nevertheless, he knew it wouldn't last long. The scene shifted to show a man running away. The one chasing him was a woman who killed him using a penknife. It was Ryan a cow. After that, she was handed money and thanked for her help. The person who paid her invited her to work full-time and quit doing just freelance gigs. But she replied that she wasn't interested in a 9-to-5 job. Some other men in that office noticed her and were curious about her identity. One of them said she was the usual type who came to them for work, an assassin with a past who was driven out of JAA. But he added that he didn't care about any of that as long as they're skilled. Ryan then walked outside and washed her face. She entered a room while soaking wet and said it suddenly started raining. Yuzuki welcomed her home. He said he hadn't noticed it was raining. By this time, they had been on the run for a year. They were squatting in an old, abandoned rest stop building, hiding with just the two of them. Ryan was delighted when she saw their dinner and commented that it looked fancy. Yuzuki said he found an emergency food stash in the backyard. He was about to say something else, but stopped when he noticed blood on Ryan's fingers. He grabbed her hand and angrily said she had killed someone again. Ryan was annoyed, saying she forgot to wash it off. And so Yuzuki lectured her. He told her that killing people would leave a trail. If JAA found them, they would be dead. Ryan replied that she covered her tracks. But Yuzuki said that wasn't the issue. While sitting, Ryan said they needed money to survive, so he should stop being naive. Yuzuki suggested they could hide their identities and find work. But Ryan responded that they needed more than just peanuts. She said he was forgetting what they were trying to do. This made Yuzuki fall silent. Ryan clarified that they needed to wipe out Alkmaar to save his companions. She explained that there were over 20 veteran assassins working at the orphanage. Therefore, they were totally outgunned and outmanned. Ryan asked if he understands. They needed dough, moolah, and emphasized that money talks. She turned away and said if only those guys, referring to Nagumo and Sakamoto, were with them to help. But they couldn't risk making contact. Ryan paused and thought it was childish to say that. Yuzuki remained quiet and admitted he didn't want her to die. He also didn't want her to keep killing anyone, though startled by what he said. Ryan replied that if they were going to save his friends, they would need to kill enemies. Yuzuki knew that, but said that's how he honestly felt. He wished he hadn't been born into that world. Their lives could have been different. He said it didn't seem right that they would kill people just for his own happiness. That night, the two lay on separate mattresses on the floor, their backs turned to each other. Ryan thought how childish that was. She said she liked how innocently Kei or Yuzuki's thinking is. However, that wasn't possible because the world isn't kind to everyone. She then remembered her niece Akira and thought it was up to her to make that world a place where kind people could remain kind. Meanwhile, someone reported to Asaki that they had found Yuzuki. He was hiding in the Tohoku region with Ryan Akao, the woman who he fled with. They also had intel that Ryan was taking illegal assassination jobs. Asaki pondered upon hearing Ryan-Akao's name. He thought she was the woman who led Kei astray, so he called her a wench. Several weeks later, Ryan showed up again at the agency, where she was offered new work. The man greeted her, saying he hadn't seen her in a while. Ryan thought about what Yuzuki said about not wanting her to kill anymore. So, she decided not to accept the job. Her excuse was that she didn't feel like it. However, the man asked her to at least hear what the job was. He explained that the task was just to escort a CEO's child to safety, an innocent 14-year-old. It was a corporate war, and the other side had tough guns too. He added that they needed an assassin of her caliber to pull it off. Ryan looked at the child's photo, and because of this, she accepted it, saying this would be the last time. Ryan then messaged Yuzuki saying she would be gone for a few days. She would get in touch when the dust settles. In Yuzuki's mind, he thought she had taken another assassination assignment. He blamed himself, thinking Ryan was being forced to dirty her hands while he just hid in safety. He thought he was a coward. Suddenly, someone arrived at their hideout. It was Asaki. He asked how Yuzuki could live in such a dirty hole. Yuzuki was extremely shocked when he heard his voice. He broke into a cold sweat upon seeing him and asked how he had found him. Asaki replied that his little adventure was over because they would return to Alkmaar. Yuzuki refused, saying now he couldn't be pushed around anymore. However, Asaki said he knew what Yuzuki was thinking. He wanted to save his friends at Alkmaar. So, he proposed a deal to him. He would only need to do one last mission for him. The job was to kill a certain skilled assassin. If he completed the mission, he promised to free his friends from Alkmaar. Yuzuki closed his eyes and remembered his friends Gaku, Kumanomi, and Haruma. When he opened his eyes, he asked if Asaki meant that. If he did this, then he could live with Ryan and his friends. However, he thought about how he had never killed intentionally. He wondered if he could do it. The scene shifted to show a moving vehicle. While inside, Ryan had made her decision. After this mission, she would stop killing. She was determined that this would be her last kill, while for Yuzuki, this would be his first. Both are driven by their desire to protect the people they cared about. Yuzuki waited by the highway, as the target was supposed to pass by around 5 in the morning. While waiting, he kept thinking whether he would be capable of killing the target. Nevertheless, he believed he had to do it, as he couldn't always just protect himself. Meanwhile, the van carrying Ryan continued its journey. She called the driver's attention and asked why they were taking this route, as it wasn't part of the plan. The driver simply responded that it was the CEO's orders. He told her not to mind the route, as her job was to kill anyone who would attack. Ryan asked to stop the vehicle, as she sensed something wasn't right. Just then, the front tire of the van suddenly burst. When Ryan noticed what happened, she instructed the driver to take care of the client and told them to leave the area. She put on her hood and said she would handle the opponent. She quickly jumped out of the vehicle to face the hooded adversary. Akira noticed how fast the opponent was. She hadn't even taken a stance when she was suddenly thrown against the wall after being kicked. As she sat there, Ryan thought deeply upon seeing the opponent's weapon up close. She dodged the attack and suddenly realized that she had seen that weapon somewhere before. That's why Akira kicked at the opponent's hood to see who it was. She was shocked to realize it was Kei Yuzuki. Because of this, she hesitated, while Yuzuki took that opportunity to stab her in the body. When the blade pierced through her body, Ryan's hood fell off. Kei couldn't believe what he saw. Ryan fell to the ground and looked at him. Yuzuki's eyes widened when he realized it was Ryan, and he asked why she was there. He approached her, but Ryan just laughed and commented that it wasn't bad for an emo loser. Yuzuki couldn't accept what he had done and repeatedly asked why. Ryan held his face and apologized to him. She said she wanted to protect all of them, so that kind people would remain kind. However, she was slowly losing her life. Yuzuki was still in shock from what happened, that he himself had killed her. Suddenly, someone walked towards them. It was Asaki, who said that he had no right to be sad. He added that Yuzuki's foolish choices had led him there. Therefore, he shouldn't wish for peace and happiness now, because he couldn't escape this world. Yuzuki remained stunned by what happened. While turning his back on Ryan's lifeless body, He just stood there when Sakamoto arrived. In Yuzuki's thoughts, he was supposed to follow Ryan to the grave. Sakamoto approached Yuzuki, and this was the moment when, after a year of being in the order, they finally got a tip about where to find Yuzuki to locate their friend Ryan. Yuzuki thought that his fate should have followed Ryan, but he explained about situs inversus, a rare condition where a person's major organs are on the inverse side of their body. So what should have been a fatal bullet wound miraculously missed his organs. That's why he didn't die when Sakamoto shot him. After their confrontation, he just walked away, and people who saw him were shocked by the blood on his body. They couldn't believe his appearance as he sat down on the street. People had different reactions. Some were scared. Others felt pity, thinking it must be painful. Some were glad they weren't in his situation, while others didn't care and didn't even look because it wasn't their problem. According to him, the assassin world and regular world weren't different at all. Even though he was bleeding on the street, and despite so many people seeing him, some even took pictures, while others just passed him by. Nevertheless, not a single person reached out to help him, except for one person in his life, which was Ryan, a cow. He wondered why she had to be the one to die, while he and those people, including Asaki, were still alive. He questioned where were the people that Ryan wanted to protect in this world. Because of what happened, he was filled with anger and thought that was enough. He no longer cared what would happen to that world. Kei went to Alkamar Orphanage, and the staff was surprised by his return. When the man was about to ask where he came from, Yuzuki suddenly beheaded him. Another staff member who witnessed this ordered to gather all the assassins in the facility and kill that boy. However, the opposite happened. Driven by anger and resentment that had built up inside him, he had killed 34 people indiscriminately. That includes the Alkamar staff, the JAA members stationed there, the office workers, and even the janitor were among his victims. He then proceeded to the room while covered in blood and opened the door. He called out to his companions Gaku, Haruma, Kaminomi, Gozu, and Tenkyu. He said that he had returned. He told them they would no longer be weighed down by karma, as they no longer had any responsibility for whoever they killed. After that, those who grew up in Alkamar Orphanage gathered together and were freed, and they promised to destroy everything. Back to the present, where Akira faced Ryan's personality inside X, she realized the reason why X killed her. Ryan clarified that they were set up by that scumbag Asaki. Akira cried upon hearing this and said what happened was horrifying. Ryan comforted her. She added that she and Kei were assassins. Once you've killed someone, she explained, you're bound to face a bad end. You'll be getting your just desserts. But Akira was different. She wanted Akira to remain a kind person, to stay who she was. Akira was about to say something, but Ryan advised her not to get involved with assassins. She told her to go home and live normally, the kind of normal life that she and Kei only dreamed of. Akira protested and said she couldn't do that. She couldn't abandon both of them. Ryan patted Akira on the head and thought that kind people were really troublesome, hoping that Sakamoto and Nagumo would do something. Back at the Mia clinic, Sakamoto had returned to his normal chubby look while eating cup noodles again. Others were discussing Sakamoto's franchising plan. Shin said that if they made Sakamoto's into a chain, they would have stores throughout Japan. When asked if it would be like 7-Eleven, he replied yes. Heisuki thought that would be a lot of stores. Shin proudly stated that he might become the manager of store number 2. Heisuki was excited about this and volunteered to work there too. But Shin told him not to be stupid. There would be so many stores, so he could become manager number 3. Heisuki couldn't quite believe he could become a manager. Meanwhile, Lu said she would have a store specializing in Chinese ingredients called Sakamoto's Chinese Store. They were excited about this idea, but Wutong had a different reaction. He stopped them and questioned if they were seriously considering making Sakamoto's into a chain. He said that to take over the JAA, they would need to defeat the order. And so he asked if they could really do that. Shin told him to shut up because they were retreating into a fantasy world. He told him to stop being a wet blanket and spoiling their fun. Lu agreed with this, asking him to not rain on their parade. Wutong paused and said he hadn't realized that. Shin knew it too. Of course, Sakamoto was different, but all of them had no chance against the order. If they compared themselves to the order right now, they were still far behind. So, He thought to propose to Sakamoto that they should start intensive training. They should do whatever was necessary. Heisuke was surprised at how fired up he was. Sakamoto pondered at the mention of intensive training. While they waited for his answer, he thought there was a point to it. Right now, they were even struggling to protect themselves. However, Shin had his own style, and so did Heisuke. He had almost nothing to teach them. While continuing to slurp his noodles, he realized that he too needed to get back on top of his own game. He needed to at least return to his glory days. He noticed a show on TV where a student praised someone he called master. Sakamoto thought about how he wished he had a master. The scene shifts at a hospital. People were talking about the confined Kandaka. They were curious about who he was, but one said not to worry about things that don't concern them. Their only job was to kill the traitor Nagumo. According to the intel department, Nagumo was paying the hospital bills. One couldn't believe it and thought this patient must be special to him. If they used that invalid as bait, then Nagumo might show up. And indeed, he suddenly appeared in the form of the person talking and commented that it was interesting. He beheaded the man. His companions couldn't react quickly enough. They pointed their guns at him, but Nagumo just pulled the blanket and threw it in the air, blocking their view. Nagumo targeted both men's legs and cut them. He moved behind them, and the man was shocked when he suddenly stabbed them in the head, killing both. Nagumo took off his coat and sat down, thinking this might be the last time he could come there. He said he got that hospital room thanks to his privilege as an order member, but since he was removed from his job, that access would be gone. Well, at least they confirmed the death of his friend Akao. He thought there was no need to keep Kandaka alive anymore. He remembered the memories they shared and said goodbye as he stood up. However, someone suddenly pulled on his hand, which surprised Nagumo. It was the patient Kandaka, who slowly opened his eyes. He called out to Nagumo and asked what the situation was. Kandaka managed to sit up from the hospital bed, greatly shocking Nagumo. After Nagumo told him what happened, Kandaka couldn't believe he had been in a coma for 8 years. He stared at Nagumo and said he hadn't changed at all, then asked how old he was. Nagumo commented that was rude, since he had been through a lot. He added that the doctors had said Kandaka would never wake up. It was a miracle. He gasped, then asked how much Kandaka remembered. Kandaka recalled being on a bodyguard assignment with them. He asked about the others, Sakamoto, Akao, and Yuzuki. He was curious if they were still alive. Because of this, Nagumo explained everything. Kandaka found it hard to believe that the quiet boy Yuzuki had terrorized the JAA. He said he hadn't realized how serious the situation had become. Anyway, Nagumo said he was happy that Kandaka had woken up. He said honestly, he had quit the order and times are tight now. Kandaka was puzzled by what he said as he looked for something in his pocket. Nagumo looked at the list and said that his life support bill was 1.2 million per month, after half the cost was covered by assassin insurance. Therefore, the total cost over 8 years was 1.15 billion. Nagumo added that he had been paying for him, so he should pay him back as soon as he could, and then they'd be all good. Kandaka stared at the bill, unable to believe he gave it to him right after waking up from 8 years of coma.
Oh my god! Even does it from... Oh my god!
Nagumo apologized and explained that he had his own expenses too, like weapon repairs and other things. So, they should just talk soon. Kandaka commented that he was harsh, but he had no choice but to accept and thought of doing a few gigs as rehab. He just needed to kill 20 or 30 targets from the bounty list, and so he looked for his ID. He was surprised when he saw there was a fatso with a 1 billion bounty. He remarked that assassins these days must have become soft. He paused when he read the name Taro Sakamoto. He just laughed and called him poor fatso. He said he had the same name as Sakamoto. Since Nagumo mentioned that Sakamoto had retired, he thought it couldn't possibly be him. He was pleased because it would be perfect for his first rehab gig. While outside, Nagumo realized he had forgotten to explain the recent stuff about Sakamoto, but he just let it be. Meanwhile, Sakamoto was jogging with Shin and Heisuke. Heisuke complained about whether they really needed to run, since it was so hot that day. Shin told him not to be a wimp. He said they needed to be as tough as they can be, in case the order attacks. Sakamoto wondered if this would help them become better fighters. He wasn't sure since he never had a master. So, In times like these, he felt lost. He thought about what he should do. Sakamoto was startled when he heard someone shout. Shin couldn't believe it when he saw someone bouncing from building to building. Something incredibly fast was coming towards them. It was Kandaka, who landed on the stoplight near Sakamoto. He complained that his legs were too slow because he had been bedridden for so long. Sakamoto recognized him, but Kandaka told him not to just stand there staring at him while calling him fatso. He said it wasn't a good look. Shin asked if he worked for X, since he wasn't part of the order. Sakamoto paused and was unable to believe that Kandaka was awake. Kandaka hadn't expected him to know who he was. He came down to the pedestrian lane and was impressed with his intel because he knew his name. Now, it made sense to him why he had a 1 billion yen bounty. Shin was curious if Sakamoto knew him, and he replied that he would explain later. For now, he told them not to take their eyes off him for even a second. He said he could kill them in an instant. True enough, Kandaka suddenly disappeared from where he was standing, and when Shin asked what he meant, he suddenly rushed at Sakamoto. Because of this, Sakamoto was thrown very far. Shin was concerned for Sakamoto and was impressed by his incredible speed. Sakamoto went straight into a building where people saw him. He had forgotten how fast Kandaka was. Meanwhile, outside, Shin and Heisuki planned to sync up. Shin said he would hold him for a moment, and Heisuki agreed. Shin stared at him and told him to stop. However, Kandaka suddenly disappeared from his sight. Shin was very annoyed because he missed him. Nevertheless, Heisuki still had his aim on him. Kandaka was impressed that even though his movement was too fast for the naked eye, the sniper still had a perfect bead on his route. He noticed he had crazy intuition. As for Shin, he tried to pull off something from a distance. Since Kandaka didn't know what it was, he immediately dodged. He was curious about what it could be. He approached them and grabbed them by their necks. He said the two of them were fun. He asked if they were new to the JAA and greeted them with "nice to meet you." He suddenly threw them in opposite directions. Because of it, they knew he wasn't just insanely fast, but he was like an invisible missile. Meanwhile, Sakamoto jumped down from above and targeted Kandaka. However, Kandaka blocked him using his arm. Sakamoto asked why he was targeting him and if he didn't remember him. He said he was Sakamoto. Kandaka replied that he had heard Sakamoto became famous 8 years ago. So, it seemed he now had imitators. Sakamoto was puzzled by what he said and explained that he was the real Sakamoto. But Kandaka just replied that if he called himself Taro Sakamoto, most assassins would surely freak out. Too bad it wouldn't work on him. He said the real Sakamoto was his friend, and he knew just how skilled he was. Sakamoto paused when Kandaka bid farewell and called him a phony. However, as Kandaka was about to attack, Sakamoto said he would show him that he was the real Sakamoto. He suddenly attacked Kandaka. The force was so strong that it destroyed the side of the bridge, and they fell on the train rail. Kandaka landed on the moving train and realized he was screwed up. He asked what was up with him. He quickly ran and declared that he was the world's fastest assassin. He asked if he thinks he couldn't outrun the train. Suddenly, Sakamoto ran from the opposite direction and positioned himself to punch him hard in the stomach. He hit him hard and even destroyed the beam there, causing them to be thrown off. Kandaka commented that it was really something, so it was time to level up his game. However, he removed his glasses when he saw the slimmed-down Sakamoto. After Sakamoto explained the situation, Kandaka apologized and said that he never would have guessed Sakamoto to get so fat. Sakamoto then asked when he woke up, and he replied just yesterday. He was curious why they hadn't woken him up sooner. He noticed Shin and Heisuki and realized they were Sakamoto's assistants. He said they were pretty good. In Shin's thoughts, he couldn't believe he could move like that after lying in bed for 8 years. He wondered what kind of person he was back in the day. When Kandaka asked what they were doing there, Sakamoto answered they were working out trying to get stronger. Suddenly, Sakamoto realized something and said he had found him, the perfect master. Kandaka removed his shades again, puzzled by what he said. He asked if this meant they wanted him to be their master. He said they should forget about that. Sakamoto was surprised by this response. Kandaka clarified that it seemed like a hassle. Moreover, he questioned why it should be him. Sakamoto replied that he had taught them before. Kandaka couldn't believe he had done that in the past. He apologized to them, explaining that he was busy because he owed a debt to Nagumo. When they asked how much, he answered that it was 1.2 billion yen. Sakamoto confidently responded that he would take care of the funds. However, Shin was shocked by this, saying that Sakamoto didn't have that kind of savings. But Sakamoto revealed his plan to take over the JAA and open stores throughout Japan. That's how he said he would get the money. Kandaka couldn't believe when he heard this plan. He asked if he heard correctly that Sakamoto planned to take over the JAA. Shin became nervous because Kandaka was a JAA assassin. In other words, he was an enemy. Nevertheless, Kandaka responded that it sounded fun, so he would help. Shin was shocked at how easily Kandaka agreed to help. Sakamoto hit him on the head and told him to stop being overly excited as he is too loud. Kandaka admitted that he really didn't like the current JAA chairman, Asaki. Furthermore, he was already on the fence about going back to the JAA. Shin commented that it seemed Kandaka wanted to be free from responsibilities and commitments. After they told him the entire plan, Kandaka just said I see. In other words, they would be facing both the Order and X's group, which is why they needed to become stronger. Sakamoto agreed, saying that was correct. Kandaka looked at them, calling Shin, Blondie, and Heisuki droopy eyes. He agreed to train them. Based on their movements that he had observed earlier, he said they showed potential. But regarding Sakamoto, he told him to forget about it. Sakamoto asked what he got against him. Kandaka pushed up his glasses and said that he's got nothing to teach him. If Sakamoto wanted to surpass his current level, he would need extremely intense training, the kind where he was like narrowly escaping the jaws of death. Sakamoto was curious about how he could accomplish that. Kandaka responded vaguely that it would be through fighting you-know-who. The scene shifted to Torres reading a newspaper. He commented that it was garbage. The horse race predicting AI app was completely useless. Whoever made it was a moron, he said. However, he thought it through for a moment. If he quit now, the 1,000 yen he paid for it would go to waste. He reasoned that the only way to win was to keep trying until it happened. Everyone knew that. Suddenly, he noticed Sakamoto walking nearby. He sighed and said that killing seemed to be the best way to make money. Wasn't the world beautiful? He remarked. He then radioed someone and ordered them to execute the plan. While walking, Sakamoto kept thinking about who Kandaka was referring to, the person he supposedly knew that he should fight. Meanwhile, a car behind him accelerated to crash into him. Fortunately, he jumped high and dodged, causing the car to crash straight into a store. Sakamoto thought the timing was perfect. Meanwhile, the owner of the store that sold floaters was worried about what happened at his store. A man then approached Sakamoto and attacked him using a spinning rope. However, Sakamoto quickly inflated a beach ball and used it as a shield against his weapon. There was a ball attached to the end of the rope. Sakamoto placed goggles on the man's neck and pulled, while keeping his foot on the man's shoulder. After stretching the goggles, he suddenly released them, causing the man to be thrown backward. Sakamoto then got a hold of a pool skimmer net when another man rushed at him from above. This man was pointing a gun at Sakamoto. However, Sakamoto caught him in the head using the net he was holding. He then slammed him against a nearby post, causing it to collapse. Meanwhile, another man ran towards Sakamoto from behind. But Sakamoto pulled out a stick with ice cream from the Turkish ice cream shop there. He used it as a weapon against him, but the man dodged his attacks. When the man caught what Sakamoto was holding, he realized it was just a cone. The man became annoyed at what happened. Using the long stick, Sakamoto caught the man by his clothes and lifted him up. The man's pants even came off before Sakamoto slammed him forcefully to the ground.
Hey, that's pretty good.
The impact was so strong that it destroyed the ground, causing smoke to envelope the surroundings. Sakamoto turned around when Torres approached and asked what his problem was and why he hadn't killed them. Sakamoto recognized him as being from the Order. He became worried because he hadn't started training yet. Meanwhile, Torres said he needed for him to kill more people because he owed the JAA 60.2 billion. He added that Sakamoto's current bounty was too puny. So, he asked Sakamoto for a favor to kill more people so that his bounty would increase. Sakamoto couldn't understand what he meant. Torres clarified that if he killed him now, he would only get a 1 billion bounty. He said it was like someone saying, "Here's 300 yen for a snack." Sakamoto then remembered what Kandaka had said about needing to fight. He realized that what Kandaka meant was that fighting against the order would be the best training for him. Torres let out another sigh. He confessed that he truly wished he didn't have to kill anyone anymore. He said killing was exhausting, scary, and painful. Blood stinks, and your clothes get dirty. Plus, he added that everyone in that industry was a nutjob. Sakamoto then asked him why he became an assassin. His answer was simple: the money was good. What other reason would anyone have to bother with such tiresome crap? He said. Sakamoto was curious about why he needed so much money. Torres just scratched his head and admitted it was for gambling. Sakamoto asked if it was like pachinko and if he enjoyed those kinds of things. Not denying it, Torres told him to leave him alone. He said to stop asking why, asking if Sakamoto was a child. "Assassins really are idiots," Torres commented. However, Sakamoto responded that according to his wife, gamblers are the real idiots. Torres denied it. "Only the losers are idiots," he claimed. "But that makes you an idiot too," Sakamoto replied. But Torres insisted his game wasn't over yet. He was just on his way to winning. With the two on opposite sides, Sakamoto simply asked if that was so. He suddenly kicked Torres with tremendous force, sending him straight into a parked car behind them. The glass even shattered. Sakamoto was surprised to find that Torres had caught his foot. Torres reminded him that the 1 billion yen bounty on him wasn't enough yet. Sakamoto heard a strange noise and searched for its source. It seemed to be coming from Torres's hand, as Sakamoto was suddenly thrown far from inside the car by a sandblast. Sakamoto managed to stop himself and noticed that his brand slippers made of aramid fibers, a super strong synthetic fiber used in items like bulletproof vests, were destroyed. He noticed sand on the ground and became curious about it. From inside the vehicle, Torres said he wouldn't kill him yet. He was waiting for the rate to go up. He suddenly blew up both sides of the car and said he wanted to know first if he was a card worth betting on. Showing his weapon in both hands, he said he'd first see what he was made of. He told him not to die on him yet, calling him a cash cow. Sakamoto noticed that what he was holding was a sandblaster. Sandblasting is a machining method that uses compressed air to mix and blow abrasive material. The abrasive material could be gravel, glass, or metal shards. Torres mentioned that bullets were expensive. While Sakamoto cut and pulled the traffic sign, Torres said that if he was going to spend $44 to shoot 50 9mm bullets, he'd rather spend that money on horse racing. Meanwhile, Sakamoto prepared to use the sign he had cut off. He threw it with immense force in Torres's direction. However, instead of dodging, Torres simply aimed his sandblaster at the sign, gradually reducing it to dust until nothing remained. Sakamoto quickly ran when Torres aimed at him. He remarked that the firepower was impressive, and if he got hit by it, he'd surely turn into hamburger. Torres swiftly chased after him and sent Sakamoto flying into a suspended monorail. The passengers were alarmed when he suddenly crashed inside. Sakamoto thought about how fast Torres was, able to move despite his large size. He noticed something at the end while Torres jumped to intercept the monorail, targeting it with his sandblaster. This cut through the monorail's bottom, creating a hole. The passengers inside became terrified when they saw the ground below and realized the floor was gone. Meanwhile, Sakamoto became concerned when he saw a crying child holding onto their seat. The child gradually lost his grip and he fell, but fortunately, someone caught him and it was Sakamoto, who was hanging onto the handrail. The child thanked him for saving him, while he advised him to stay in his seat. He suddenly noticed Torres was there, who sarcastically commented how nice he was. He said Sakamoto shouldn't gamble. Sakamoto replied he had no plans to, but asked why not. Torres said he had no talent, then suddenly shot at the handrail Sakamoto was holding onto. This caused it to snap, and Sakamoto fell. Torres aimed his sandblaster at his face while he was falling. He fired it, forcing Sakamoto to block it with his arm. Torres then said that in gambling, people who wait to get lucky and draw a good hand always lose. Sakamoto took a bad hit because of this. Torres added that everything was about how you play the hand you're dealt. He said Sakamoto relied too much on luck. Sakamoto then grabbed the broken piece of handrail and shot its ring around Torres's foot, which surprised him. This allowed him to catch Torres by the foot and pull him down. Torres became concerned but couldn't do anything as he crashed into a moving car below, with Sakamoto on top of him. The vehicle they landed on was wrecked, and Torres was hurt from the impact. Sakamoto immediately walked away while wobbling. Torres stood up and commented that he looked like someone avoiding a loan shark. Meanwhile, the owner of the car they crashed into was shocked at what happened. While walking away, Sakamoto thought to himself that he had lost. If Torres had taken the fight seriously, he would surely be dead. Because of this, he realized he needed to up his game. He remembered what Torres said earlier about him relying too much on luck, and that it's all about how you play the hand you're dealt. This made him think about what that meant for him. The scene shifted to Kandaka. He was standing on a basketball court when suddenly a foot attacked from behind. However, he dodged it. It was Shin. Kandaka prepared himself and blocked Shin's punches. Shin was serious and untied Kandaka's shoelace. Kandaka noticed this and wobbled where he stood. Meanwhile, Heisuke was ready with his rifle at the perfect moment. Shin was pleased because everything happened according to their plan. However, Heisuke became nervous when Kandaka suddenly disappeared from the target area. It turned out he had quickly jumped and left his shoes behind to approach Shin. He kicked Shin's face, and when Heisuke looked through the scope, Shin was already lying on the ground. He wondered where Kandaka had gone, but he was already behind him. Kandaka knocked him down too and said they were no match for him, calling them dumb punks. Shin was extremely disappointed with what happened, but in Kandaka's mind, he thought they had come a long way in such a short time. Perhaps they really had potential from the start. Or maybe they had become tougher because of Sakamoto. While on the ground, Shin asked for one more try, but Kandaka refused. He told Shin that that's the best he's got. The two were confused, and Kandaka asked if they hadn't heard him. He was saying that Shin has reached his physical limit. Shin was about to complain, but Kandaka insisted he wasn't dissing him, so he told him to take it easy. To clarify, he just meant that he had done a good job with what he had. But truthfully, some physical traits, like mass and size, were inborn. Kandaka explained that with Shin's frame, even if he trained his whole life, he would never be a match to him, Sakamoto, and anyone in the order. Shin couldn't accept what Kandaka said. Heisuke commented that it was a bit harsh. But Kandaka argued that Shin's trying too hard to be like Sakamoto. He added that he has his own talents. That made Shin curious. Kandaka approached him and said he should be training his ESP instead. This made Shin reflect. Furthermore, Kandaka pointed out that Shin could see several seconds into the future and was capable of momentarily overriding an opponent's thoughts. He could have done so much with that ESP ability just now. He asked why he couldn't use it more often. Shin wanted to, but he said everything happened too quickly, making it hard to find the right timing. Heisuke commented that, in other words, he needed to learn how to use it better. At that moment, Shin wished he had an ESP mentor. Kandaka thought about it and said he knew someone who would be perfect for that. Shin was curious about who it was, and someone suddenly appeared as if they knew exactly who Kandaka was referring to. It was Nagumo who greeted them. He said there was someone with ESP in JAA, but they weren't an assassin. Shin asked who it was if not an assassin. Nagumo answered it was JAA's fortune teller. A fortune teller sounded suspicious to them, but he clarified that this wasn't just an ordinary fortune teller. Their accuracy was 100%. 80% of JAA's important decisions went through them. Once, a group of renegade assassins tried to kill them, but the day before they were supposed to attack, they all died from food poisoning from oysters. They could walk on the front lines of battle and not get hit by a single bullet. Shin was impressed and asked if that was true. Meanwhile, Heisuke just commented that he had never eaten oysters. Kandaka added that only a few people in JAA knew of their existence because it was top secret. They didn't want people thinking they needed to depend on a fortune teller for success. Because of this, Shin thought they might be able to teach him how to use his ESP more effectively. He became curious about where they were. Nagumo just smiled and asked if he wanted to meet them. The scene shifted to the JAA Assassin Support Center, where Shin and Heisuke went. A woman welcomed them there and said they were there to help. When she asked how they could assist, Shin said they were there to turn themselves in. The woman was puzzled. Heisuke admitted they were involved in the museum terrorist attack along with Taro Sakamoto and other incidents. So, Shin added, they surrender. Because of this, the two were handcuffed and faced a judge-like figure who investigated their case. The judge stated they were charged with deliberately helping and participating in various incidents carried out by Taro Sakamoto. Therefore, the two of them, Shin Asakura and Heisuke Mashimo, would be sentenced to imprisonment in JAA jail. Their terms would be 10 years. Lu was furious when she confronted them and called them stupid, idiotic, moronic jerks. She asked what they were thinking. She had visited them in prison and worried because this was a blemish on their Sakamoto store's reputation. She didn't know how to explain this to Aoi. Shin asked her to go easy on them. He calmed her down and admitted they were doing this for a reason. As Lu was crying, she was puzzled by what he said. Flashing back to their earlier conversation in court, Nagumo had explained that the fortune teller had made many bad calls regarding X's activities recently, which led to their imprisonment. Heisuke was shocked to learn that JAA had a prison. Kandaka confirmed this, saying it was mainly for assassins who violated JAA regulations. But Shin couldn't believe the fortune teller was imprisoned just for making mistakes in their predictions. Nagumo replied that this was because the fortune teller had previously maintained a perfect accuracy rating. Therefore, they suspected them of being X's ally. When Shin asked where this prison was, Nagumo answered that it was beneath a castle. The castle he was referring to was shown, the Okatabi Castle. The JAA jail was deep underground beneath it. It was divided into 3 layers, with the most despicable criminals imprisoned in the deepest underground level. The prison was extremely violent, and typically, assassins who weren't tough enough were killed on their first day there. In fact, prisoners die there from violence so frequently that nobody has ever finished their sentence or been released from there. Shin said that sounded perfect. He was getting bored with the ordinary training regimen anyway. He said it would be good training. So, back in the present, Shin was happy to be imprisoned there because he had the opportunity to meet the fortune teller. Meanwhile, Heisuke was nearly crying about being imprisoned with him. Outside, Kandaka was pleased that he didn't have anything else to worry about. When Nagumo asked what they should tell Sakamoto, he replied that he didn't need to know about this. In the next scene, Shin and Heisuke had their respective mug shots taken. After that, the prisoners were lined up in the jail's hallway for the warden's roll call, where he shouted at them, declaring that scumbags like them were the scourge of society and they should never forget that. He said they should be grateful for the privilege of breathing the air in this place. He stated they were entitled to 0 human rights, and their worth was less than specks of dust. Shin recalled his conversation with Nagumo and Kandaka where they asked if he really wanted to find the fortune teller, while being annoyed by the warden's loud mouth. During those times, Shin agreed to their question because he said no one else could give him guidance about ESP. Nagumo explained that getting into JAA jail was easy, but no one could guarantee if he would get out, to which Shin pointed out that if they weren't tough enough to escape from that prison, it would only mean they'd be dead weight against Slur, where Nagumo admitted that was true, so he decided to let them go and give them one hint. He said that the jail had 3 underground levels, and the fortune teller was at the very bottom, so they should do everything they could to get down there. After that, we moved to the cafeteria of JAA jail, where Shin and Heisuke were talking. Shin said here that they needed to figure out first how to get down a floor, so Heisuke said that based on what Nagumo said, the deeper you go, the more violent the inmates become. Shin agreed with that and pointed out that even security becomes stricter as you go down, and only guards were allowed to go up and down the floors, so they needed to find a way to get a key from a guard. Heisuke asked if he thought they could do it, so Shin said they were already here and there was no other way. While they were talking, someone tried to get their attention. 2 inmates approached them and arrogantly told them to leave their seats because those belonged to them. Shin responded that they didn't own these seats because they were in a cafeteria. Heisuke became nervous because Shin didn't back down, while the inmates just told Shin that he wouldn't want to talk to them like that, so he should just shut up and leave. While they were being told to leave, Shin said they would leave after they finished talking, which made Heisuke even more worried. One of the inmates just commented that he was a true moron, and another inmate kicked their food. The bald inmate grabbed Shin's face while angrily pointing out that he had soft cheeks, so the other one also tried to pinch them in annoyance. Because of the commotion they created, they caught the attention of a guard, who immediately shouted at them to stop. Shin politely called out to the guard and asked what time it was, but the guard just pointed at the clock and told him to look at it himself. Unexpectedly for the guard, Shin suddenly used his ESP on him to freeze him, and in that moment, Shin quickly grabbed a spoon and forcefully stabbed it into the bald inmate's neck and chest. Because of this, the other inmate tried to help by punching Shin, but he easily blocked it using a tray, and as a counter, he kicked him in the face, while Heisuke was completely shocked by the events. After taking down the two arrogant inmates, Shin stood up and told them the seats were theirs now since they were done, and he invited Heisuke to leave. The guard wondered why he suddenly froze, so he just thought that maybe he was getting old. In the next scene, while the two arrogant inmates were returning to their cell, they were irritably discussing Shin and Heisuke, while there was another inmate exercising his grip strength inside a cell. One inmate said here that Shin was stronger than he looked, while calling him a little shrimp, and the bald one added that he would pay for what he did to them. Suddenly, someone punched the inmate with hair, which caused him to spit blood and collapse to the ground, and the perpetrator commented that it wasn't hard-boiled of them to gang up on a small newbie, and here we were shown a familiar man wearing glasses. After that, we returned to Shin and Heisuke, and currently, they were cleaning the bathroom as part of their afternoon prison chores. Shin commented that this JAA prison wasn't such a big deal because if he thought about it, it seemed like only third-rate assassins ended up here, to which Heisuke said he had a good point. However, he asked if it was true that more serious criminals were on the lower levels, so perhaps the ones down there were tougher, which made Shin comment that perhaps that was the case. Shin quickly set that aside and explained that they first needed to leave the first floor and get down to the lowest floor to find the fortune teller. Heisuke happily wondered what the fortune teller might look like, where Shin said he had no idea about that, but Nagumo told them they would notice when they saw them. Suddenly, a fist burst through from one of the cubicles and punched Shin's face, sending him flying, and the perpetrator commented that instead of just standing there, they should have some fun. It turns out Boiled was responsible for this, and he asked if it was true that Shin wanted to challenge the strong ones. Shin stared at him and seemed troubled, and soon he remembered that this was Boiled who fought Sakamoto before, and also that he called himself Hard-Boiled. Boiled explained to him that when he heard someone beat up his crew, he didn't expect Shin to be responsible for it. He also asked how Sakamoto was doing while calling him a jerk, while Heisuke asked if Shin knew this man, where Shin said they had met once before, but he didn't know he was in JAA jail. Boiled added that he had already settled his score with Sakamoto, and he had no beef with Shin, so they should call it even. Shin agreed irritably, but said he should get to throw a punch first. Shin quickly rushed towards Boiled, and when he got close, he tried to use his ESP to freeze him, which confused Boiled. He managed to kick him in the face, which amazed Heisuke, but unexpectedly, Boiled could still move, and he quickly grabbed Shin by his clothes and threw him out of the comfort room, causing the wall to collapse. The force of Boiled's throw was so strong that Shin not only went through the CR wall, but also destroyed the adjacent prison bars leading to the cafeteria. Heisuke became worried about Shin after that, and the surrounding alarm began to sound with a red alert. Boiled commented that even in this place, he had learned a lot about Shin, especially stuff about the terrorist attack at the museum, which was the first exciting thing he had heard in a while, but mostly what he heard was about Sakamoto. Shin asked if Boiled thought it was cool to stand out, and that he was really a loser. While this was happening, there was a commotion occurring on the deepest floor of the prison. An individual shouted here while throwing food at the guard because he didn't want homemade food from this filthy dump of a JAA jail, and pointed out that the only future he could foresee from eating that was indigestion. The other guards commented that this individual was freaking out again, while one understood because if they were the ones locked up in this kind of place, they would really go crazy. As consolation, the guard asked their companion if he wanted to play a video game, so the inmate irritably said where was the fun in that if he already knew the outcome. Because of this, the guard was left speechless, and soon after, he he shouted that he would die if he didn't eat. The inmate fell silent for a moment, but suddenly took out a cigarette and while lighting it said that he shouldn't worry because he would soon be leaving this place, which confused the guard. It turns out that a petite woman named Atari was the one talking to the guards here, and she was introduced to us as the JAA fortune teller. She explained that her prince in shining armor was coming while pointing out that her predictions never failed. In the next scene, we return to the confrontation between Shin and Heisuki against Boiled, where Boiled told them that he had no personal beef with Shin, but if he was really looking for a fight, he wouldn't back down because that wouldn't be hard-boiled. Heisuki shouted at Shin to take it easy because his opponent had the balls to face Sakamoto. Boiled invited Shin to charge, but before they could make contact, guards arrived on the scene and immediately aimed their weapons at them while shouting not to move. There was also an individual who arrived and caught their attention, who turned out to be the head guard of JAA prison, B1, Joe Shackles, and he asked what the commotion was about. Boiled whispered a comment wondering why he had to show up today, while Shin wondered who this office worker-looking person was, so Boiled answered that his name was Joe, and he was the boss of this place, telling him to keep quiet if he didn't want to die. Joe approached Boiled and asked for his opinion on whether B1 was a good place, and also asked who should be thanked for that, to which he answered that Joe should be thanked. However, Joe suddenly shot him in the right leg because he said he was too slow to answer, causing him to cry out in pain, while Shin and Heisuki became concerned. Joe seemed irritated and explained that he loves their home here, and all he wanted was a peaceful life for their inmates, so he asked why did Boiled have to ruin it. He also asked if Boiled was forgetting his promise that if he caused trouble, he would send him down below, which caught Shin's attention and gave him an idea. After that, Joe's shining personality returned, and he happily asked if Boiled understood that, inviting him to shake hands and make peace. He also asked the inmates there if it was true that they were peaceful in B1 and that no one fought here, but when they didn't answer him, he suddenly ticked off again and became angry, starting to shout at the maggot inmates to answer him. Unexpectedly by everyone in the room, Shin suddenly kneed Joe in the face out of the blue, causing his nose to bleed. Everyone who witnessed the incident was speechless, and after doing that, he arrogantly said that it was good news because he thought that down below meant if he beat him up, he would be sent to the lower level of the prison. Joe sniffed the blood from his nose while wiping it, and after that, he swallowed it.
Daddy, chill.
He took out a paper with Shin's information written on it, where he saw Shin's prisoner ID 1394 and his full name. After learning Shin's name, Joe grinned and happily called Shin, Shinny Boy, praising his name, to which he expressed gratitude. He asked why he wanted to go down a level, and while Shin was answering that he just had some personal business, Joe quickly put handcuffs with a leash on him and violently slammed him to the floor, causing destruction while angrily asking if he didn't appreciate floor B1. Annoyed, he asked what aspect of this place didn't meet his standards, like the food, toilet paper, and monthly dog therapy. He added that he was doing everything he could to improve their experience here, and they just needed to do their part to make this a nice home. Shin turned to him with a fierce look and tried to counter with a kick, but to his surprise, Joe also put handcuffs on his foot, which shocked him. Joe pulled the handcuffs, causing Shin to lose his balance, and as a follow-up, kicked him in the stomach. He spat blood while thinking that this person wasn't just a mere guard, and that he was tough. Joe pulled the chain of the handcuffs again and started spinning Shin in the air like a toy while commenting that he was thinking wrong about this. He threw Shin towards a wall, and with such force that Shin went through to the other side, while Heisuki became increasingly worried about him. Shin laid down on the floor in pain, while Joe explained that he said if they caused trouble, they would be sent to a lower level of the prison. But if this was all Shin was capable of, he could hardly call this causing trouble. After that, he commented that there was nothing out of the ordinary at the slammer today, just another peaceful day at home. After that, we moved to a scene where Shin, Heisuki, and Boiled were bathing in the prison's public bath, and here Shin was irritated with Joe, saying that Chief Guard would pay, which prompted Heisuki to ask if that person was really that tough, while Boiled told him to forget what he was thinking because he's out of his league. Because of this, Shin turned off the shower and seriously asked what Boiled meant. So he explained that Shackles was a former member of the JAA Special Detachment Unit, a JAA Special Counterterrorism Unit that was just one level below the Order. He used to be at the top of this assassin's amazing ranking, and it was said that he was the closest to becoming Order. Boiled caught Shin's attention when he explained that, while Heisuke asked why he was now a prison guard. So he answered that he didn't know, but all he could say was if they weren't tough enough to beat Joe or him, they wouldn't stand a chance in the lower floors, which silenced Shin. After showering, Boiled started walking out of the bath while calling Shin and Heisuke morons, and he also asked why they even came to a place like this, to which Shin answered to become stronger, while Heisuke said they also wanted to meet someone on the lowest floor. Boiled grinned at what Shin said, and commented that he wouldn't become strong if he wasn't alive, and it would be no use if he died, so he couldn't help them. This made Shin think it was weird and that this wasn't very hard-boiled, while wondering if he had always been like this. We then returned to the lowest floor where Atari was, and she called a guard there Mr. Daikyo, while asking for his hand. Mr. Daikyo was confused at first about what she wanted, but when he brought his hand closer to her, she extinguished her cigarette by pressing it into his palm like an ashtray. Because of this, Mr. Daikyo screamed in pain and asked why she did that, so Atari explained that his palm lines were unlucky, so she altered them for him, which confused him. Suddenly, Mr. Daikyo's phone rang, and when he answered it, he received good news that his grandmother's hernia had healed, and he had won first prize in the lottery. He cheered with joy because of this, while his female guard companion pointed out that Atari looked glum, so she explained that she had seen a bad future, which puzzled this guard. Atari explained that on this day, at least 3 lives would be lost inside their prison, and her predictions were 100% accurate. Next, we went to the situation of the 3 friends, and here they were freezing while inside a large freezer room. Joe was with them here, and he apologized for the cold they were feeling because he was also hurting from it, but he needed to punish them. He said that was law and order, and without those things, there would be no peace. But don't worry, he added, because all they needed to do was transport all the freight he was pointing to by hand. And he also pointed out that they needed to hurry because the temperature in the place was minus 30 degrees, which could cause their death. Shin, Heisuke, and Boiled started moving, while the other men inside the room commented that Joe was really watching those 3, and another added that they could die if they weren't lucky. This man added that they must be freezing because of their thin clothes, and while he was commenting, Joe suddenly stabbed him in the right shoulder with a knife. Joe shouted at the man asking why they weren't cheering for their friends, so the other inmates there started cheering, which made Joe happy because of their team spirit. Shin commented that this guard was a maniac, and suddenly Heisuke collapsed on the floor, which worried him and made him ask if he was okay, to which Heisuke replied shakily that he was fine. Joe turned to them and asked what they were doing, and immediately ordered them to get back to work. Shin explained that Heisuke was hypothermic, so he needed to get him out of there, but Joe refused. When Shin was just trying to say that Heisuke was a sniper, and it would be bad for him to lose his fingers to frostbite, Joe suddenly told a story about 2 bad guys. He said Person A was weak, so he was given light punishment, while Person B was strong, so he was tortured. That seemed to be what Shin was proposing, but Joe pointed out that punishment needed to be fair, because if not, it would lose its meaning. Nevertheless, Shin stood firm and reasoned that Heisuke hadn't done anything wrong, and he tried to take on his work, where Joe tried again to give an example about 2 people with homeroom duties, but Shin immediately cut him off and shouted for him to stop moralizing. Boiled interjected and told him to stop, because if they didn't finish their work quickly, it would surely be the end of his friend. Shin thought about this and looked at the freezing Heisuke, and soon after, he removed his bodysuit and gave it to his friend while reassuring him that they would finish quickly, to which Heisuke tried to tell him that he was okay. While he was helping his friend, Joe suddenly kicked him in the face, sending him flying, and shouted at him to stop that. He angrily asked Shin why he needed to disobey, and if he gave him mouth sores from stress, he would pay for it. Joe quickly calmed himself down, and because of this, he was forced to make adjustments. He put numerous handcuffs on Shin's left arm and tied him to the containers to prevent him from finishing their work, saying to let him cool his head first. One of the guards tried to point out that Shin would die within minutes in such clothing, but Joe told the guard not to talk back or he'll get killed. Boiled and Heisuki became worried about Shin's situation, and even the other inmates there looked at him. Joe began explaining that they were just pulling each other down, like when their grades suffer because they hang out with good-for-nothing friends. Something seemed to tick in Shin when he heard that, and his body twitched. Even in his bad condition, the seriousness was visible on Shin's face, and when an inmate walking in front of him carrying a box passed by, he used his ESP to make him stop. The inmate he stopped fell onto another inmate, and then he made the hit inmate stop too. One by one, he stopped the inmates, causing a human domino, which confused those he controlled about what was happening to them. The last inmate he controlled fell onto a ladder with a box, and because of that, the ladder fell onto a shelf, which fell onto another bigger shelf, which then fell onto stacked freight, catching Joe's attention. Shin grinned at what he had done, and calmly said for Joe to die. The numerous freight affected by the domino effect started falling, and some fell on Joe as he was walking. The other personnel there shouted out of concern for their chief, while the freezing Heisuki was delighted by what his friend had done. Joe spat blood due to the weight of what had fallen on him, and irritatedly asked Shin what he had done while calling him little snot, to which Shin said, smiling, how could he have done anything there, and that Joe just happened to trip, while calling him a clumsy loser. Joe asked again what the snot-faced punk Shin did to him, so Shin replied with a grin that he just told him that he fell on his own. Heisuki and Boiled were amused by what he did, while Joe was gradually getting irritated while asking what his problem was. Joe took out handcuffs again and asked irritably why Shin was seeking so much attention, adding that at his age he shouldn't expect to be pampered. Shin wasn't intimidated by this, and while pulling the handcuffs on his left arm, he challenged Joe to come at him. Heisuki became worried and told him not to do that because his movement was limited due to the handcuffs on his arm. Joe began charging at Shin, while Shin just waited for the incoming attack. Using his innate reflexes, Shin easily evaded Joe's attempt to put handcuffs around his neck. Joe was surprised by this and commented in his mind that it was insane because at their distance from each other, he could dodge all his attacks, and it was almost as if he could read the future. Shin grinned at Joe to tease him, saying that in fact, he was actually slow. On the side, Heisuki noticed some frozen fish that had fallen from the crates, and he quickly grabbed one to throw it to Shin. When Shin caught it, he was initially confused about why Heisuki would give him a frozen yellowtail, but he quickly figured out how to use it, so he thanked his friend while smashing the frozen fish into Joe's face. Joe turned to look at him after that and held his head. When he smelled what had splattered on him, he smelled that it was fishy, which angered him and made him say that a yellowtail isn't a weapon, and because of that, he was dead meat. Boiled warned Heisuki to be careful because if he helped him, he would pay for it too, to which Heisuki responded that he didn't care, which confused him. Heisuki explained that his friend's life was at stake here, so of course he would help him. Because of this, Boiled was surprised and asked himself why these two were so hard-boiled. While watching this, Shin's focus was visible on the next attack Joe would send his way. Joe suddenly released numerous handcuffs with long chains, and here Shin quickly noticed that he couldn't dodge them. Unfortunately, Joe managed to catch him because of the many handcuffs that wrapped around his body, while Heisuki shouted his name in concern. Using all his strength, Joe pulled the shackled Shin and started swinging him towards the large shelves full of freight. Shin could do nothing while Joe was doing this to him except cry out in pain. After that attack, Joe called the control room and ordered them to lower the temperature in the warehouse where they were by 10 degrees, which caught Shin's attention. Joe apologized to Shin while calling him Shinny Boy, saying that he hoped he would reform, but he was going too far. Joe grabbed a frozen yellowtail, so Shin quickly tried to use his ESP on him to stop him like he did with some inmates there, but it didn't work, and in an instant, Joe suddenly appeared behind him with extraordinary speed and struck him hard in the back with the frozen yellowtail, which slammed him into the wall. Joe started to enjoy his beating of Shin and arrogantly asked if he understood that he didn't hate torturing and killing insolent brats like Shin. Before long, The temperature in their warehouse reached -40 degrees, and it started affecting Shin as he said his body was starting to freeze up. He thought here that he could still do something if he could just manage to get out of the handcuffs wrapped around him. Heisuke tried to move even though he was already shivering from the cold just to help Shin, but he couldn't do it. As a finale, Joe charged at Shin again while asking him how he should kill him. Shin could do nothing but curse as his end was approaching, but unexpectedly, Boiled suddenly intercepted the charging Joe, causing him to be hit by Joe's handcuff slash, which severely wounded a large portion of his left body up to his right shoulder. He also spat blood due to the severe injury he sustained, while Shin's eyes widened at what he witnessed. Due to Boiled's interference, Joe pointed out that he was running out of patience, and he knew what would happen if he opposed him, to which Boiled simply replied that he didn't care, which puzzled Joe. While blood dripped from his mouth, Boiled began explaining that after his defeat by Sakamoto, things in his life became chaotic, which led him to engage in illegal activities. He said the next thing he knew, he was in the slammer, but now that he saw Shin and the others standing on their own feet, they reminded him of what being hard-boiled truly meant. Boiled grabbed the thick layers of handcuff chains wrapped around Shin, and using his sheer strength, he easily ripped them off as if it's just paper. Because of that, the inmates watching them were amazed. After that, Boiled finally collapsed due to his wound while saying the words hard-boiled, so Shin shouted at him not to give up. This event didn't stop Joe from charging, and he started swinging a handcuff with long chains, while saying that he couldn't stand being irritated anymore and would protect the peace on this floor. Using the extended range of the normal handcuffs, he tried to strike him with it, but Shin managed to dodge it. Shin thought here that he was at a disadvantage because he had no weapon, and he could feel the extreme cold of the surroundings, so if he didn't act quickly, he would be worn down. Because of this, he remembered Joe's call to the control room to lower the room temperature, and here he realized that the control room was just next to the warehouse. He focused on using his ESP while thinking this was all or nothing, which made Joe wonder what he was doing, where he even thought he was surrendering. He carefully sensed his surroundings, and before long, he found the staff inside the control room on his right. He immediately ordered him to destroy a specific thing, which the man he controlled did, puzzling his companion in that room. Due to its destruction, all lights inside the warehouse suddenly went out, darkening the surroundings and startling the people there. Joe irritably asked his staff what was happening and who pulled the breaker. He listened carefully to his surroundings, and it was shown to us here that the temperature of the place was gradually rising. He could hear the dripping of melting ice in the dark surroundings. He said he couldn't see anything, but he was still confident because Shin couldn't see either. While he was just thinking that if he could get by until the power returned, everything would be okay, Shin suddenly said beside him to forget about that. Shin explained here that his anxiety played exactly into his plan, and because of that, he could read his position. Unexpectedly for Joe, he received a solid right straight to the face from Shin. After that, the power suddenly came back on, which caught the attention of the people there. Heisuke was looking happily at Shin, and it turned out that he had managed to knock Joe down. He also took his jacket so he wouldn't be cold, while Joe was begging them not to kill him while shivering. Shin explained that he doesn't intend to kill him, but in exchange, he needs to transfer them to B2. While this was happening, we returned to where Atari was, and here the female guard was thinking about what she meant when she said 3 lives would be lost in the prison today, and how that prediction was going, while Atari was just eating cake on the side. She also thought that because her predictions were 100% accurate, they should be prepared for whatever might happen. However, it seemed the female guard was just overthinking what Atari said, when Mr. Daikyo saw 3 dead cockroaches, which disgusted him, where Atari vaguely pointed out that this was what she was talking about. In the next scene, Shin, Heisuke, and Boiled boarded an elevator with Joe. Heisuke asked if it would pass through B2, to which Joe agreed and pointed out that only he, as the chief guard, had access to it, so he assumed the responsibility of escorting them there. It turned out that Boiled had been pointing a gun at Joe's back, so Joe suggested that he lower it, but Boiled replied that he wouldn't trust him until they reached B2. Shin then asked Boiled if he was really okay with what they were going to do since he would pay for it later, to which Boiled told him not to worry about it. They did him a favor by reminding him what it meant to be hard-boiled, and from now on, he would rule B1, so Shin just agreed with that. After that, Heisuke asked what kind of place B2 was, which made Joe grin and say that they should just say it's a giant maze, puzzling both him and Shin, though deep inside they were excited because it seemed fun. Soon after, the elevator stopped at B2, and as the elevator door opened, Joe announced that they had arrived. They were greeted by blinding light, and they saw birds flying around. They seemed to have entered a room where the sky was visible, which puzzled Shin. Heisuke carefully observed the birds in the sky and noticed that what they were seeing was just a monitor, which further bewildered Shin and made him ask if he was serious and how that was possible. He commented that this place was weird, especially since he couldn't see any guards around, which made him question if they were really in a prison. Joe explained that this place used to be an ordinary prison like B1, but the prisoners got bored, so they started adding various things, which resulted in it becoming a gigantic labyrinth. He pointed out that they were still fixing up the place, and no one really knew how many rooms, prisoners, or guards were inside. Boiled added to what was said that there were even rumors of a supermarket, movie theater, sauna, hospital, and even a funeral home in this place, which amazed Heisuke since it's like a small city. After that, before returning to B1, Boiled gave Shin a dap and told them to be careful because the prisoners here were real tough, and he wanted to see them return, to which Shin thanked him for everything he had done. As Boiled entered the elevator, Shin and Heisuke walked toward the entrance to B2. When they entered, their surroundings became a desert, so Heisuke remarked that there really were different kinds of rooms here, while Shin said they needed to find the way down to B3 from here. As the two walked, there seemed to be a silhouette above them watching them, which Shin sensed, causing him to look back, but he saw nothing there. During their walk, they encountered a naked man sleeping on one side with only newspapers covering him, which had headlines about major terrorism. Shin and Heisuke were shocked when they saw him, so they shouted asking if this man was okay, and they were sure he was freezing. The man woke up, and it turned out he had an eye patch on his left eye. He quickly apologized to them while explaining that he was fine because the sand was warm. He sat upright and apologized again for the weird first impression, and began to tell them that as soon as he arrived at this place, he was attacked and robbed, so he didn't know what to do earlier, which probably led to him just sleeping on the side. The two were bewildered and asked if even his clothes were taken by the thief, so he clarified that no, because he didn't have any clothes when he came here, which made the two shout that he was a weirdo. After that, Heisuke asked if this man had also just arrived at B2, to which the man agreed and said he heard that at the lowest level, there was a fortune teller with amazing accuracy, which caught Shin's attention. Heisuke happily said it was a coincidence because he and Shin were also here to find that fortune teller, which made the man shout if he was serious. However, Shin seriously asked why he was looking for the fortune teller, so the man explained that he had a fight with one of his friends, and he wanted to know how they could reconcile. Shin scanned that this man wasn't lying, and he couldn't sense any hostility, so he thought that perhaps this man wasn't a threat. Just as he was about to ask who the friend was that he was referring to, he started sinking into the sand, and even Heisuke and the man were beginning to sink into the sand, which they soon realized was quicksand they were standing on. Suddenly, someone commented from their side, welcoming them to the Antlion Hell room, which caught Shin's attention, and when he looked over, he saw three individuals where one had a mask that looked like it was from medieval times, another had goggles, and the other appeared to be a middle-aged man. The masked man introduced themselves as the Super Antlion Hell Brothers, and this room was their hunting grounds, while the one with goggles explained that once they're caught by the quicksand, they're trapped there while being called ants. The man they encountered earlier noticed that these were the ones who stole his package, which the masked man also noticed. He pulled out an object wrapped in cloth and mockingly asked if this garbage he was holding was what the man was referring to. He said it was wrapped too tightly and the object was heavy, so he thought to just throw it away. Heisuke started to panic because he was sinking faster, while Shin became concerned as the situation was becoming serious, so he thought about what he could do. The naked man commented that he could do something if he just had his package. So Shin quickly asked if he could save them if he got his package back, to which the man agreed, but said he couldn't reach it from where they were. The masked man pulled out a gun and said they talked too much while calling them ants, to which Shin responded by using his ESP to make him drop the package. The masked man wondered why his body dropped it, and as he let go, it started to unravel, soon revealing a modernized bow inside. The man was delighted to have his buddy back and immediately aimed it at the Antlion Hell brothers. The man with goggles laughed at him because he thought about how he could fight using an outdated weapon, but while he was still speaking, when the man released his arrow, it created a huge hole in the masked man's body as if hit by a cannonball. The man with goggles was shocked at what he witnessed, and even Shin couldn't believe what he saw, while the man with the bow smirked. The man with goggles immediately charged in anger at the killing of his brother, but before he could get close, the man with the eye patch quickly reloaded another arrow. The man with goggles was confident because he managed to raise his two armored arms to try to block the arrow, but unexpectedly, it easily penetrated through his arms, as well as between his eyes, and the impact was so strong it caused a small explosion when it hit the wall behind him. The man with the eye patch said that this man didn't expect that to happen, and surprisingly, arrows were better at piercing objects than bullets. The remaining member of the Antlion Hell brothers also charged at him, and using his blade, tried to slash the man with the eye patch. However, the man with the eye patch managed to stop his blade using just the bowstring of his bow, which shocked this man. The man with the eye patch commented that with that level of power, he couldn't even bend his bowstring. As a counter, the man with the eye patch quickly jumped behind the member of the Antlion Hell brothers, and while preparing to send an arrow right above him, he asked if they should end this fight. The man with the sword wondered when he got behind him, but before he could finish his thought, the man with the eye patch released his arrow, and the impact was so strong that it exploded the enemy's entire body. Heisuke and Shin's eyes widened because they couldn't believe the power they had witnessed, and they asked themselves who this man was. After that, the man with the eye patch apologized because he forgot to introduce himself, and here he said that his name was Tenkyu, and he thought they would get along well. In the next scene, we shifted to Atari's room in floor B3, where she was complaining that she doesn't like ketchup. Mr. Daikyo said it was delicious, but Atari still refused because she only ate white things. So the female guard asked why she was eating now, to which she responded that she might not get to eat for a while. After that, Atari called the female guard Miss Hoshi, and she also called Mr. Daikyo, and pointed out to them that they would escape today, which shocked these two guards. Just as Mr. Daikyo was about to shout and ask what she meant, Atari silenced him, and added that they would do it while the other guards were still sleeping. Miss Hoshi also asked why she was being so sudden, but Atari just said that the three of them would have extremely bad luck today, and if they stayed in this place, they would surely die. This is when Miss Hoshi realized what Atari truly meant when she said earlier that today, at least 3 people would lose their lives inside this prison, which made her nervous. She asked if she meant that the 3 of them were the ones she was referring to earlier, to which Atari nodded, while Mr. Daikyo commented that he thought earlier she was talking about the cockroaches, so Atari pointed out that was just a joke. Miss Hoshi reasoned that they were guards and they shouldn't let prisoners escape, but when Atari asked if they would rather die then, it made them think. Miss Hoshi asked if they could really escape if their bad luck was severe, so Atari said they could change their fates using lucky items, which confused Miss Hoshi and Mr. Daikyo. Atari then said that her lucky item for today was her soulmate, so she would look for him on floor B2. After their conversation, Miss Hoshi and Mr. Daikyo accompanied Atari to floor B2, but as soon as they stepped there, Mr. Daikyo immediately said that what they were doing was dangerous because this place was a lawless labyrinth ruled by assassins where they rebuilt everything, so this place no longer conformed to their map, but Atari just said not to worry because she was a very lucky person, which made Mr. Daikyo point out that she just said her luck was terrible today. He also asked what his lucky item was because if he had one, it would ease his mind. So Atari said his lucky item was Tiger, which confused him. Miss Hoshi called out to Atari and asked what kind of person her soulmate was, to which she replied that she didn't know exactly, but her fortune said they had something in common. Miss Hoshi continued questioning her and asked what type of man she liked, and she answered a young Gary Oldman, which Miss Hoshi seemed to agree with when she supported it, while Mr. Daikyo told them to be serious. While they were walking, Atari stepped on a booby trap, causing fast needle-like objects to start emerging from the walls around them. However, fortunately, Miss Hoshi moved quickly, and using her speed, she carried Atari to dodge danger together. Miss Hoshi's expression immediately became serious, and Mr. Daikyo also turned to look at what she was staring at, and it turned out that a man who looked like a bad person had arrived there. This man commented that they were unlucky because these guards ended up in his room, and he also pointed out that it was rare to see people like them here. Miss Hoshi recognized this man as Higuchi, a death row inmate, but he had vanished 3 years ago before his execution, so it appeared he had been living here in B2. Higuchi quickly charged at them while saying it had been a long time since he did a good deed of taking out the trash, so Miss Hoshi prepared to anticipate his coming attack. Miss Hoshi stepped back, which caused her to step on another booby trap, and because of that, more needle-like objects started emerging towards her, but fortunately, she managed to dodge them while thinking that even the floor was rigged. Higuchi laughed at this and said it seemed they didn't know which tiles had triggers, while Mr. Daikyo was just crying in fear because it was impossible for them to survive in this kind of room on a bad luck day, so Atari told him not to worry. She took out numerous cow chim and said that to counter bad fortune, they needed good fortune. After she said that, she dropped all the sticks there, and the narrator began to explain to us that her supernatural power was to accurately predict her own fortune, so she could choose the best course of action at any time and place. Higuchi quickly went behind her, but when she saw a cow chim with the direction southwest written on it, she effortlessly dodged this man's sneak attack. Higuchi clicked his tongue in irritation at her and tried to attack her again, but because she sneezed, she ducked, which also caused her to dodge his attack again. After that, Atari told him that the lucky color was white, while Higuchi continued throwing numerous needle-like objects towards her. It seemed Atari was hit when Higuchi's attack caused an explosion, which worried Miss Hoshi. However, while the narrator added that because Atari had fortune-telling powers, all types of moves and skills were useless against her, we were shown here that she just spread her arms as if accepting the attack, but she wasn't hit by any of what Higuchi sent there. Suddenly, the ember part of Atari's cigarette came off and was blown by the fan in the room, causing it to land on Higuchi's forehead. Higuchi stepped back because his face was burned, and unfortunately, he stepped on a tile with a booby trap, so it wasn't long before he fell into his own trap, where numerous needle-like objects pierced his body. While this man was losing consciousness, Atari explained that in conflict, a smoke break brings luck, and it seemed Higuchi's luck was just worse. Shock and amazement were visible on Mr. Daikyo and Miss Hoshi's faces at what they witnessed, and they commented that so this was the world-class fortune teller of JAA. They simultaneously shouted in their minds how Atari's power could be fair, while the impaled Higuchi finally collapsed. When Shin heard Tenkyu's name, he wondered where he had heard it before, while Heisuki told him that he didn't need to kill those who attacked them. Tenkyu went to the bodies of the Antlion Hell brothers and started searching them, and asked Heisuki if it was right that their situation was either kill or be killed, to which Heisuki agreed, but with reservations. While he was still speaking, Tenkyu suddenly handed him a pistol that he got from their enemy's body, telling him to take it, which bewildered Shin because he was stealing from a corpse. Tenkyu also took some shorts and was happy they fit him, but when he saw Shin and Heisuki's reactions, he became speechless. He said they didn't have any weapons, so he thought they would want one. So he asked what was wrong with what he did. In the next scene, while walking to the next room, Shin and Heisuki explained to Tenkyu that they came to this prison to hone their skills, which impressed Tenkyu and made him comment that it was right to have goals. Heisuki approached Shin and whispered asking what they were going to do now that Tenkyu was following them. So Shin told him to take it easy and that man wasn't in his right mind, so he could make him angry. Shin commented in his mind why Tenkyu's name was so familiar to him. His thoughts were interrupted when Tenkyu said something to them, explaining that before they became friendly with each other, he had forgotten to ask them something, which made Shin wonder. Tenkyu asked them if they knew the name of an assassin named Taro Sakamoto, which made both their hearts skip a beat, and Tenkyu added that he was on a mission to kill him and his friends. He said he was trying to find where he was, so he asked did they know anything about them. Because of this, Shin remembered why the name Tenkyu was familiar to him, and while this was happening, we suddenly moved to X while he was on the rooftop of a building in the middle of the forest, and Kumanomi arrived to tell him that she found out where Tenkyu was, which made him ask where. Kumanomi answered that apparently he was inside the JAA jail, but she didn't know what his purpose was there, while also pointing out that that person had always been weird. After that, she also asked if X was still angry with him, to which X said that Tenkyu was fundamentally different from them, which made Kumanomi ask how he could say that and pointed that they survive Alkmaar together and were friends. X pointed out here that one of the purposes of Alkmaar was to create killing machines without emotions, so he told her that they were failures of Alkmaar, while Tenkyu was a success. He said keeping him with them would be too risky. After that, we returned to Shin and Heisuki while they were talking to Tenkyu, and here Shin answered that they knew that name because he was formerly a legendary assassin, and he also asked why Tenkyu was pursuing him. Tenkyu explained that he heard he was bothering his friend, and since he and that friend weren't on good terms, he thought that if he killed Sakamoto, they might reconcile. It was also said that one of Sakamoto's friends had ESP, and another one was a sniper. Unfortunately, he said, he wasn't that smart and was weak at gathering information, so he thought of asking the fortune teller of JAA. Shin nervously answered that he understood him, and it seemed like what he needed to do was difficult, while also thinking that he and Heisuki almost got caught because he didn't expect to encounter one of X's friends in this place. Shin remembered the 100% accuracy of the fortune teller, so he said they couldn't go there with Tenkyu. He thought about whether they should jump this man now while his guard was down, as this was their chance. However, his thoughts were interrupted when they heard a buzzing sound in their surroundings. Heisuki wondered about what they were hearing, and one side of the hallway wall they were walking through started to crackle. Soon after, a horizontal laser suddenly formed there that quickly crawled toward them, but fortunately, they managed to jump and dodge it. All three of them stared at this laser, and after landing on the ground, Shin noticed that his shoelace still got caught, which burned it, and he commented that he didn't know what that was, but they couldn't let it hit them. Heisuki was worried because he thought they were just walking through a plain old corridor, while Tenkyu quickly informed them that the laser was coming at them again. For horizontal lasers emerged here, but fortunately Heisuki and Tenkyu managed to slip through between them, which made Shin say nice to their moves, but unfortunately, Shin tripped because of his untied shoes. Because of this, he lost his balance and couldn't do anything when the laser approached his face. However, when the laser was about to touch his face, Heisuki quickly acted, and using 2 bullets from the pistol Tenkyu gave him, he blocked both sides of where the laser was coming from to create an opening for Shin. He successfully saved his friend, while fear was visible on Shin's face from his near-death experience. Heisuki immediately approached Shin and asked if he was okay, to which Shin replied that Heisuki kept blowing his mind. Unfortunately, their problems weren't over when Tenkyu looked behind them and commented that it looked like their end, as it turned out that the next laser there was in a net pattern, where they had no way to slip through. Shin was worried about this, but quickly found a way and used his ESP to scan the surroundings, which caught Tenkyu's attention. After a brief moment of thinking, Shin asked Tenkyu if he could hit the center of the small window on the other side's door, to which he agreed. Tenkyu immediately released his arrow toward it, and it managed to slip through the small gap in the laser and hit the window Shin was referring to. It turns out there was a man behind the door in front of them, and Tenkyu hit him solidly in his left shoulder. This man was introduced to us as Laser Yamamoto, a laser assassin, and he asked how they knew he was controlling the lasers from where he was. Shin closed his eyes in fear because the laser was so close to his face, but fortunately, it immediately disappeared when they hit Yamamoto, which gave both him and Heisuki relief because they thought they were dead there. After that, Shin thanked Tenkyu for his help, which Tenkyu just brushed off and soon asked how he knew where their enemy was. So Shin tried to cover up his use of ESP by saying he saw a shadow coming from there, but Tenkyu didn't believe it because he said if there was one, he would have seen it. He added that during their fight with the Antlion Hell brothers, he also did something weird, making him think that he was hiding something here. Heisuke remembered what Tenkyu said about being on a mission to kill Sakamoto and their friends who had ESP and were snipers, which made him nervous and think their situation was getting bad, while Shin also started to get nervous while thinking about what he should say. Shin seemed unable to find the words to explain, but soon he suddenly said that actually, he was the fortune teller Tenkyu was looking for, which made Tenkyu stare at him and bewildered Heisuke. In his mind, even he himself was crazy for saying that, but he decided to just go with it. He explained to Tenkyu that his fortune-telling powers told him where the enemy was hiding, and he was on the lam because he couldn't stand the JAA anymore. And he also didn't tell him about this because they didn't know each other very well yet. At first, Tenkyu seemed unable to believe that he was the fortune teller, so they stared at each other for a moment, but soon Tenkyu shouted because he said he was embarrassed and didn't realize that the fortune teller had been with him all along. And he also said that Shin should have told him this sooner. This was quickly replaced by excitement when he thought this meant it was his lucky day today, while Shin and Heisuke were speechless because they couldn't believe Shin's plan worked. After that, Tenkyu immediately asked Shin while calling him Mr. Fortune Teller if he could reconcile with his friend, so Shin started acting as if he was divining it, and soon said his power was telling him that Tenkyu could do it, but on one condition. Tenkyu then asked what's the condition, so he answered that he should stop killing people, while thinking that he would control Tenkyu. In the next scene, we move to the city, where there was an announcement about a horse race where Super Hayami won using an astounding burst of speed that left the runner-up behind by 5 lengths. Because of that, Torres became irritated and commented that he might just reinstall the horse racing prediction app. It was also explained here that while Shin and Heisuke were inside the JAA jail, Sakamoto was facing Torres, where this was already his 5th loss against this individual. Sakamoto indeed seemed to be struggling to keep up with Torres, as we can see him kneeling on one knee while gasping for breath. Torres commented that no matter how much Sakamoto tries, he wouldn't win against him as Torres had made a living as an assassin for more than 50 years. Torres was also thinking that he was ruining his plan because he needed Sakamoto to kill more people to raise his bounty, as his plan was to collect it when it increases to pay off his debts. However, he said that Sakamoto only wanted to fight him even though he wouldn't win, where even in pachinko parlors he would follow him, which made him question what the point of their fights was. Suddenly, Sakamoto called out to him and asked how he could defeat him, so Torres responded by asking how would he know that, to which Sakamoto pointed out that he wanted his bounty to increase, and if so, he would train him, which made Torres comment not to order him around. After that, Torres explained that when fighting Sakamoto, he wasn't afraid of losing his life, and his gimmick of fighting using only random objects in the surroundings was getting old. Normally, he said, assassins master a specific weapon that gives them an edge. Suddenly, Sakamoto climbed onto the rooftop railing, which made Torres speechless and shout asking what he was doing, to which Sakamoto replied that he was taking too long. The two decided to just walk around the streets, and while walking, Torres tried to convince Sakamoto to kill innocent people by making up stories to increase his bounty, but Sakamoto just silenced him. Because of that, Torres pleaded for him to try it because he needed to pay off his debts. While they were talking, Aoi arrived riding a bicycle, and she happily greeted her husband and asked if the person with him was a new friend. Sakamoto tried to explain but was quickly cut off when Aoi said this was perfect timing and invited Torres to join them for dinner, which left Sakamoto speechless. In the next scene, we move to the Sakamoto family's dining table, where Torres was with them and Aoi was asking him if there's any food he doesn't like. In Torres's thoughts, he wondered what he was doing here and said normally he would just be in the disgusting JAA cafeteria eating dinner while watching M-League. He asked Sakamoto why they were hosting his enemy, so Sakamoto explained that he doesn't kill when money isn't involved, and he said this while remembering Torres's words about only killing for money. However, Torres said it still wasn't normal to invite him for dinner. Hannah approached him and asked him to make an airplane using paper, so he pointed out to the child that she couldn't make an airplane using just paper, and she needed aluminum, alloys, stainless steel, titanium, plastics, and said she can't get lift without wings, which confused Hannah. Aoi told Hannah not to bother Torres, causing both of them to turn towards her. When Torres turned to look at her, he saw Awi's extraordinary speed in simultaneously cooking, preparing, and doing various other tasks. Torres wondered in his mind what this broad had and how Awi could do all of that simultaneously. He said she was essentially simultaneously chopping, using the skillet, straight throwing blade, and using mysterious devices. He said everything she did had perfectly refined movements that he knew you could only achieve after doing it for many years. He pointed out that most assassins choose just one weapon and stick to it, where they spend years perfecting its use. However, he said, this woman Awi was using everything around her with perfect skill, and she even looked relaxed enough to enjoy it. Hannah called him, so he irritably said he had no time for that, but Hannah still showed him that she made an airplane. After folding the paper several times, Hannah threw it in front of him, which caught Torres's attention, and he was so surprised that he immediately stood up from his seat, even bumping into Sakamoto. When he observed the flying paper, he realized it really was an airplane, so he wondered if Hannah had configured it on the spot. He picked up the paper airplane after it fell to the ground and examined it, where he noticed that Hannah had folded a paper to create wings to make it fly, and it even looked similar to an F-117A Nighthawk. He also examined Hannah's hands and noticed she had no blisters, making him think she was a genius because she hadn't undergone stringent daily training to achieve this. After that, Sakamoto told them both that dinner was about to be served, so they should put away their toys. Torres's attention was caught by Awi when she asked Sakamoto to add the finishing touches to the food. So when Sakamoto started cooking, Torres couldn't believe that he could also do what Awi was doing, which made him ask himself where he learned all of this. He thought that he couldn't lower his guard because of the skill he was seeing. After a while, when they finished eating, Sakamoto sent Torres away, but before he left, he asked why he had hidden it. Sakamoto wondered what he was referring to, so Torres became irritated and said not to play dumb, and what he was talking about was the technique he showed earlier. He asked why wasn't he using it in a fight, and if was it because he was trying to act cool, which really confused Sakamoto and made him wonder what he was talking about, so he just sent him away again. While they were talking, we returned to Shin, Heisuki, and Tenkyu where, as they were walking in the new room, Tenkyu commented that it was surprising that Shin was the fortune teller. In Shin's mind, he was saying that what he said was just a spur-of-the-moment lie, but now he needed to use it to control this man. How does he tell fortunes? Tenkyu suddenly asked. So Shin quickly made up a lie and said that obviously he receives revelations, which confused both Tenkyu and Heisuki. While talking, they heard a hissing from a black cat beside them that caught Shin's attention, and he took this opportunity to act and shouted that this was a revelation, which made Tenkyu ask if it was true. Shin said they needed to do a handstand for 5 seconds, or else they would be struck by misfortune. He rushed them to do it before it was too late, but Tenkyu didn't do it, so he asked why, to which Tenkyu excitedly said that he wanted to know what misfortune he would get, which left Shin speechless. He said nothing bad would probably happen to him, so Heisuki found a way and grabbed a small stone beside him while still doing a handstand, and skillfully threw it at the ceiling above Tenkyu. As part of the ceiling was dropping above Tenkyu, Shin used his mind to prevent him from dodging, which caused Tenkyu to take a hit to his nape, making him yelp in pain. Because of what Heisuki did, they convinced him that misfortune really would come, and Shin was indeed genuine, while Shin was saying he was right, and also asked if he remembered what he said earlier. So Tenkyu agreed and said it was about not killing people anymore, and if he did that, he would become friends again with his pal. Shin said he was right while thinking that if they could just continue making Tenkyu believe this, it would turn out well, but this was quickly interrupted when Tenkyu asked if they knew what was wild, and what he was referring to was becoming somewhat true, which made Shin wonder what it was. Tenkyu explained that the reason why he and his friend were fighting was about whether they would kill them or not, which made Shin ask who he was going to kill, and Tenkyu answered that he was referring to Sakamoto's wife and daughter. This gave shock to Shin and Heisuki's expressions, and he added that he thought it would be good bait for Sakamoto, but X suddenly got angry, which he couldn't understand why. Shin couldn't control himself when he heard this, so he quickly charged at Tenkyu and solidly punched him in the face, which sent him flying. Heisuki immediately stopped him and told him to stop it, where he struggled and told him to let him go. He said that even though this was violating the Sakamoto family rules, he needed to take down the scumbag Tenkyu right now. Tenkyu was confused when Shin's mood suddenly changed as he talked about the Sakamoto family rules. Heisuke asked if he was serious about it. Shin just broke off a pipe nearby and said that this person had crossed the line. This confused Tenkyu. Suddenly, Shin attacked him using the broken pipe. Tenkyu called for a timeout and apologized. However, Shin was already prepared to kill him. Suddenly, his impromptu weapon split in half. It turned out Heisuke had shot it. He said he didn't want to point his gun at Shin, so he should just chill out. Tenkyu used this opportunity to escape. Shin just watched him as he jumped away, which annoyed him. He then grabbed Heisuke and asked why he had stopped him. Heisuke responded that of course he would stop him. He asked what he meant by saying he would kill him. He wondered if he wanted to return to being an assassin. Shin replied, "Sure. If that's what it would take to stop this person, he would kill him. If not, something horrifying would happen." He was certain that Tenkyu wouldn't hesitate to kill Aoi and Hana. He knew this because he had read what was in his mind. Therefore, he would follow him. This time, he told Heisuke not to interfere. However, Heisuke said they both changed since meeting Taro Sakamoto. Shin couldn't answer. Heisuke added that they couldn't just decide to kill him when he hadn't even talked to the guy yet. Meanwhile, Tenkyu continued running away. He wondered where he went wrong this time. He was confused about why people were suddenly getting pissed off at him, and he couldn't understand it. Just when he thought they were going to become friends, this happened. He paused and thought about why he wanted friends again. Suddenly, the wall in front of him was destroyed, and out came Atari with her guards. Tenkyu was dumbfounded when he saw this, and asked what was happening. The three were lying on the floor, coughing because of the smoke. Hoshi had already warned that there was a gas leak in that corridor, so Atari shouldn't smoke. But she replied that it just seemed like bad luck. Her guard insisted that it had nothing to do with luck. Then he noticed Tenkyu and was puzzled by his expression. Atari mentioned that he was the one she was referring to. Hoshi was curious if he was her knight in shining armor, but she just took another cigarette and said time was up. She apologized to her guards, Hoshi and Daikyo, because it seemed they had encountered the great misfortune. Tenkyu had no idea what this meant, while Atari's guards worried. Miss Hoshi became nervous when she realized that this guy was the great misfortune that Atari foretold. Daikyo stepped up and told Hoshi to take Atari as far away as possible. She was in disbelief by his plan. He quickly attacked Tenkyu, who surprisingly didn't fight back. He punched him so hard that he was thrown into a glass wall, which shattered. When he stood up, Tenkyu wondered what was happening. This time, he was certain he hadn't done anything at all. Hoshi asked what Daikyo was planning to do. He readied his metal claw and said that if he was the killer that Atari had foretold, then it couldn't be avoided. He needed to take him down. He launched a series of attacks while Tenkyu just kept backing away. After a while, he managed to hit him, and they broke through another glass wall, where Tenkyu took the impact. Though he was already bleeding, Daikyo didn't stop and kicked him with tremendous force. He wondered why Tenkyu wasn't fighting back. He thought that perhaps he wasn't skilled in close combat. With this realization, he became confident he could finish him off. However, someone suddenly stopped him, which puzzled him. It was Shin, who had rushed over after seeing the fight. Heisuke called out to Tenkyu, who was surprised to see both of them. They approached Tenkyu, who was lying on the floor, while Atari recognized him. Shin asked how he was doing, which Tenkyu hadn't expected. Because of this, he asked if Shin wasn't angry anymore. When Shin noticed that Tenkyu hadn't used his weapon, he asked why he didn't fight back. Tenkyu replied, asking if Shin didn't remember what he had said, that if he didn't kill anyone, his friend would forgive him. Shin was surprised by this. Tenkyu admitted that truthfully, he really didn't understand what friendship was. But when he saw Shin and Heisuke together, he felt somewhat envious. In Shin's mind, he thought that Tenkyu was just a really naive person. Perhaps Heisuke was right that he could still change. Suddenly, Hoshi pointed her gun at them and asked who they were. Shin was about to introduce himself, but Tenkyu beat him to it, saying that Shin was the impressive JAA fortune teller. Shin went along with it, which Hoshi couldn't believe. She asked what they're talking about. After all, Atari was the JAA's fortune teller. Everyone was shocked by this revelation. After checking his phone, Daikyo identified them as Sakamoto's friends. They were wanted by the JAA. Hoshi became angry and asked who they think they are to pretend as the JAA's fortune teller. Suddenly, Daikyo's body split in half down the middle, which extremely shocked everyone. Now, Tenkyu said he understood. Shin had been lying. Because of that, he could kill all of them. He just stood there, holding his bow, and said that would be easy. Tenkyu said Shin was lying. The truth was that he was Taro Sakamoto's friend, and that was scary. Shin raised his hand and said he didn't want to fight Tenkyu. However, Tenkyu just smiled and suddenly shot an arrow at Shin's face, which he quickly dodged. Shin became annoyed because at that moment, he had no other choice. He tried to punch him, but Tenkyu swiftly evaded. And just as Tenkyu was about to load another arrow, Heisuke suddenly grabbed him from behind. He apologized to Tenkyu for lying to him. He said they should talk about it first, but Shin stopped him and told him to get away. Tenkyu simply dropped his arrow to the floor and caught it with his toes. He positioned his bow and arrow backward, aiming at Heisuke. He used his foot because Heisuke was holding his arms. When he released the arrow, Heisuke managed to dodge it. Shin was worried for him and quickly ran closer. However, he was surprised when Tenkyu suddenly jumped to approach a man there who was wondering what the commotion was about. Tenkyu inserted the man's head into the bow, and when he released the string, the man's head suddenly split in half. This caused blood to splatter toward where Shin was standing. Still smiling, Tenkyu aimed his arrow at Shin this time, who once again dodged it. And because Shin wasn't hit, Tenkyu realized that he might be the one with ESP. Upon seeing this, Heisuke pointed his gun at Tenkyu and told him to chill. Tenkyu then realized he had run out of arrows. Heisuke fired his gun, and instead of dodging, Tenkyu just stretched his bowstring and caught the bullet with it. He used that to shoot back at Heisuke. It hit him in the shoulder, and Heisuke couldn't believe that Tenkyu had managed to redirect his bullet using the bowstring.
Nani?
Tenkyu said that anything that could fly could become an arrow. After witnessing this, Shin thought that he was skilled. His close and long-distance combat was seamless, and Tenkyu's fighting style was full of surprises. While Shin was thinking, Tenkyu quickly moved close to him to strike him with his bow. Because of this, Shin was thrown outside, crashing through the wall where he hit. While falling, he used his power to try to stop Tenkyu, who just snapped a pipe. Tenkyu just used that as an arrow to shoot at Shin. However, Shin was confused about why he couldn't stop Tenkyu. Atari suddenly jumped, which Shin noticed. She approached him and touched his body. She said it was okay and told him to ignore Tenkyu's attacks. She looked at him and told him to just focus on her. Meanwhile, Tenkyu was breaking off metal bars from the window and positioning them to use as arrows. He said Atari was in the way. He showered them with arrows, firing continuously. However, the two just seemed to be dancing in the air while holding hands. Shin just stared at her, while Atari kept her eyes closed. Tenkyu couldn't believe that not a single arrow had hit them, and even Shin was surprised. It seemed they were okay. Because Atari had her lucky item with her, her fortune was extraordinary today. All her wishes would come true. They then fell onto a pile of garbage. Shin was curious about what she had done. Meanwhile, Atari just took a plastic bag and scooped up the scattered materials there. When Shin asked what she was doing with the metal scraps, she just answered that the chances of life emerging on Earth were 1 in 10 to the 40,000 power. Shin couldn't understand what she meant. Meanwhile, from afar, Tenkyu was positioning himself to shoot at them again. Atari further explained that it was equivalent to the chance of putting parts of a watch in a bag, shaking it, and having it reassemble itself inside the bag. Shin got curious with what she was doing with the garbage. She just answered that they were extremely lucky. She put his hand inside the bag, and when she pulled it out, he was already holding a gun. Astronomically lucky, Atari said. Tenkyu was very surprised when he saw they had obtained a gun out of nowhere, and he was curious about how she had done it. They fired the gun to Tenkyu's side, and suddenly the wall behind him exploded, causing him to be thrown away. He wondered if it was also just luck that there had been a gas explosion there. Tenkyu quickly ran to look for them below, but they had already escaped. He was impressed by the true fortune teller. He said that if he could get her, Yuzuki would surely be happy. Shin and the others ran away with Atari, the fortune teller. While running, Shin thought that he had underestimated Tenkyu. He realized Tenkyu wasn't someone who could be controlled. Heisuke caught Shin's attention and spoke to him telepathically. When Shin asked what it was, Heisuke replied that the world's greatest fortune teller was far from what he had imagined. He had expected an old woman. Lost in thought, Shin asked Atari why she was helping him. She didn't answer him. However, Hoshi, Atari's guard, told him not to get the wrong idea. He explained that Shin just happened to be Atari's lucky item for the day. Shin was completely shocked by this statement. When Atari looked at Shin, she thought to herself that he didn't look like Gary Oldman at all. Shin was puzzled when he heard her thoughts and became curious about who was asking anyway. Suddenly, Atari grabbed onto his clothes. When he asked why she was holding onto him, she answered that it was important for her to hold onto her lucky item. However, Shin removed her hand and insisted that he wasn't an item. Atari became worried, and right at that moment, a flower vase fell on her head. Shin wondered where it came from. Meanwhile, Heisuke asked Atari if she was okay. Hoshi mentioned that these things don't usually happen to Atari. When Atari stood up, something was odd. So Shin asked what she was doing. She replied that she didn't know why she couldn't move. Hoshi lifted her up and explained that she had stepped on 100 pieces of bubble gum. Because of these events, Atari grabbed Shin again and pleaded with him to stay close, calling him her lucky item. Heisuke commented on how terrible her bad luck was. Hoshi remarked that she seemed extremely unlucky that day when not holding onto her lucky item. In Atari's mind, she thought her luck had taken a sharp turn for the worse. As she pondered the possible reason, Tenkyu suddenly appeared before them. Finally, Tenkyu said he had found the fortune teller. They became worried upon seeing him. Tenkyu first attacked Atari's guard, Hoshi, hitting her with a powerful kick that sent her flying away. Heisuke took position to shoot, but Tenkyu managed to destroy his gun and quickly knocked him down. Shin became concerned for his friend. Because of this, Shin realized who Tenkyu's real target was. He quickly ran while holding onto Atari, saying they needed to leave. However, Tenkyu aimed and said they wouldn't escape. When Shin looked at him, he let go of Atari. And since Shin thought she was supposed to be the target, he positioned his body to shield Atari from getting hit. Heisuke and Hoshi became worried when they saw this. Now, Tenkyu had caught Atari and was pulling her by the hair. He was happy, saying she would be the solution to everything. Meanwhile, Atari remained silent, suffering from having her hair pulled. Hoshi demanded that Tenkyu release Atari, calling him a rat. But Tenkyu didn't listen and only asked how he could fix his problem with his friend. Atari thought for a moment before answering that it was impossible. She said his boss's alternate identity would never accept him. But Tenkyu's question was how they could return to how things were before. Atari insisted that deep down, he already knew the answer. He pulled her hair again and said he knew. Therefore, he demanded she use her fortune teller's good luck to fix it. But she replied that she couldn't do that either. She admitted that she had used up all her luck. Everyone was shocked by her statement. She explained that everyone has only a limited amount of luck in their entire life. Her power only gave her the ability to withdraw her future luck. And now that it was depleted, she would never be lucky again. She said that this was the fate of those who survived in the world of assassins by relying solely on fortune teller skills. Meanwhile, Shin struggled to lift his head while they were talking. Tenkyu couldn't believe that all this time, she had used up all her luck just for JAA. Even Heisuke couldn't accept if this was true. Because of this, Tenkyu became disappointed, saying he had come all this way just for this, only to find it was worthless. Shin became worried when Tenkyu still wouldn't let go of Atari. Tenkyu said that even though her luck was depleted, she was still alive, so she must surely have a tiny bit left. She replied that she had already decided where to use her remaining luck. Tenkyu suddenly started choking her and lifted her up. Atari was clearly struggling because of this. Tenkyu said that sometimes you just really want what others have. While on the ground, Shin couldn't believe that Tenkyu was hurting a defenseless girl and called him an animal. He said he had been completely wrong to give him the benefit of the doubt. Without question, he thought, Tenkyu wouldn't even hesitate to kill Hana or Aoi to serve his goals. Shin concluded that there are people in this world who just cannot be allowed to live. Shin managed to gather his strength to stand up and attack Tenkyu. Tenkyu hadn't expected this attack, so he was hit by a sharp object that Shin had picked up from the ground. This cut his cheek and made him release Atari. Shin caught her and said things were different now. He said he would play for keeps, and Heisuke noticed something different about him. As they were about to leave to get away, Heisuke carried Atari, while Shin stayed behind and didn't join them. Heisuke was puzzled and asked what he was doing. He told them they need to leave that place. Shin apologized to him, saying he couldn't go with them. Heisuke was very surprised by what he said. Shin added that he was resigning from Sakamoto's store. When Heisuke asked what he meant, Shin simply removed his name tag. He handed it to Atari, saying it might work as a lucky item for her. He said it was his most cherished possession. Heisuke asked if he was serious. Shin remembered their previous conversation when Heisuke had said they both had changed after meeting Taro Sakamoto, but Shin knew he hadn't changed at all. Ultimately, deep down, he was still an assassin. Therefore, he would stay behind to kill that slime. Shin said he would return to being an assassin again, and they hadn't expected his words, especially Heisuke. He pulled Shin and told him he wasn't making sense. He asked what Shin meant about returning to being an assassin and what was happening to him. Shin suddenly noticed something, so he pushed Heisuke, causing him to avoid what would have been Tenkyu's attack. Tenkyu was impressed that he had dodged it. Shin asked Heisuke if he thought Tenkyu needed to die. Heisuke couldn't answer him, but for Shin, Tenkyu deserved to die. That was his true feeling. Heisuke couldn't believe what he was hearing. Shin recounted that when he read Sakamoto's mind, there was a memory where Aoi said that killing was wrong. She had said that everyone, no matter who they were, was precious to someone else. Shin said painfully that he wanted to become that kind of person as well, but he said he couldn't do it because not everyone was a good person. Tenkyu used this opportunity to attack. He hit the ground using his bow, causing it to crack and create a hole. Because of this, both of them fell. Heisuke reached out his hand to Shin to save him. However, Shin didn't reach out. He fell down below, while Heisuke shouted to Shin that he was the one who invited him to join the Sakamoto store, and he doesn't want to be there without him. Nevertheless, Shin continued falling, while thinking about the Sakamoto family rules. Sakamoto had told him before that killing was forbidden if he wanted to be part of their household. These became his rules too, and he had been happy about that. He also remembered the time when Sakamoto trusted him with something, and the time when he asked Sakamoto not to underestimate him. Sakamoto had stopped him from going there, saying he was no match for him. Sakamoto had also told him that he now had many people he cherished. Therefore, if he could protect any of them, he would do it. He had asked Shin to help him with that, and Shin had agreed. The two had fallen straight to the lowest floor of the JAA prison, to be 3. They landed in water, so Shin struggled to pull himself out. He was startled when someone suddenly attacked him. Fortunately, he moved quickly and managed to dodge. He took a stance while Tenkyu walked closer to him. Tenkyu said he liked what Shin had said earlier. Because of that, Tenkyu thought he had finally heard Shin's true feelings. He gets that it was tiring to be a good person. Shin agreed. He said he was surrounded by incredibly good people, and it was ridiculous. Therefore, he wouldn't let anyone hurt them, even if that meant he had to kill Tenkyu. Tenkyu was impressed by him. He said that when Shin put it that way, it made it sound justified. However, ultimately, he was just a killer. This made him question if there was any difference between the two of them. Shin replied that there was no difference. And that was the problem, he added, calling Tenkyu an idiot. Tenkyu shot his arrow again and tried to hit Shin. However, he dodged it. Tenkyu was impressed that he had managed to avoid such a fast attack. He said it was beyond lightning reflexes. So, he realized it must be like a psychic ability. He wondered if Shin had the power to see the future. Because of this, he thought the situation had become trickier. Tenkyu thought he needed to draw back the bowstring, and the split-second delay couldn't be avoided. While Shin attacked him, he thought if he used his bow the regular way, then Shin could easily dodge it. Because of this realization, he tried a different plan. Shin was puzzled when Tenkyu jumped and, while in the air, suddenly struck the ground. The floor cracked from the impact of his attack, causing the ground where Shin stood to break apart. His plan was to make it impossible for Shin to dodge. Shin stared at him and tried to stop him. However, it had no effect on Tenkyu, which confused Shin. Tenkyu continued his attack directly, causing Shin to be thrown back. Shin became worried because he couldn't overwrite Tenkyu's thoughts. But he remembered there was one time when he had managed to stop him. He wondered why and what was the difference between then and now. He recalled what Nagumo had told him about how Shin's ability sounded too convenient. Because of this, he started thinking about whether there were risks involved. He realized that, up until now, he had never used that power more than once on the same person. On the other hand, Tenkyu hooked his bow onto a pole in the ground and stretched it. This time, he used himself as the projectile that suddenly released. His hand reached for Shin's face, and because of his momentum, they crashed through 4 walls and broke through them. Tenkyu said Shin shouldn't space out like that. He said he wasn't like him, hesitating to kill. Shin challenged him. Meanwhile, noise from below could be heard on the other side. Heisuke worried if that was Shin. He thought that if he didn't do something, they might lose him. Under pressure, he thought of Sakamoto and asked himself what he should do. Then footsteps could be heard. Heisuke asked who he was, and it turned out to be Torres approaching them. Torres faced them and asked if she was JAA's all-powerful fortune teller. He said he needed a reading for his horse racing ticket. Back to Shin, who was still being attacked by Tenkyu. While running, he realized that his power could only be used once on each person. Therefore, it would no longer work on Tenkyu. Meanwhile, Tenkyu removed the string from his bow. He jumped and struck his weapon against the pipes behind Shin. The bow strings sliced through those pipes, causing gas to leak and envelop Shin. Tenkyu used this opportunity to move behind him and was about to strike his head. However, Shin sensed this and managed to kick him in the face before getting hit. Although Shin had already used his ability to rewrite Tenkyu's thoughts, he decided to use his other weapons instead. He foresaw Tenkyu's next move, so before Tenkyu could get close, he was ready to block his attack. He caught Tenkyu's elbow with his left hand while holding a sharp object ready to pierce his eye. But Tenkyu quickly dodged this. Shin continued his successive attacks, and Tenkyu became concerned as he couldn't keep up very well. Shin managed to kick him in the nape, causing him to fall face first to the ground. Now, Shin planned to break his neck. While Tenkyu was pinned down, he grabbed crushed stones from the ground and threw them at Shin. Some of these were sharp rocks, which wounded Shin. Tenkyu wondered why Shin could dodge his arrows but failed to evade the rubble he threw. This led him to a realization. Shin was surprised when Tenkyu suddenly broke the ground again and threw the rubble in his direction. Shin could do nothing but shield his head with his hands. Because of this, the rocks hit his right leg, which troubled him greatly. At this point, Tenkyu claimed he understood the situation. He said Shin struggled with highly random attacks. Shin's leg was now bleeding, which would make it harder for him to dodge future attacks. Furthermore, he could no longer overwrite Tenkyu's thoughts. This made Shin worry about what he could do now. He wanted to move, and when he told himself this, he surprisingly managed to jump right when Tenkyu shot another arrow at him. Tenkyu was shocked that he could jump despite his injured leg. He said it was impossible. Shin then realized that if he thought he couldn't move, he could actually overwrite his own thoughts. However, he could only use this power once, and he had already used it. After landing, Shin suddenly attacked Tenkyu, but the latter nimbly escaped. He only managed to hit the ground where Tenkyu had been standing earlier. Tenkyu backed away and fled from Shin. He hid among the pipes above and reflected on how earlier, Shin had managed to dodge his arrows but couldn't avoid the debris. Then, despite appearing injured, he had jumped incredibly high into the air. According to him, Shin was a mystery. Shin became worried because he couldn't detect what Tenkyu was thinking. He estimated that Tenkyu was probably over 400 meters away. He was confident that from such a distance, it would be impossible for Tenkyu's arrows to reach him. However, Tenkyu just smiled and lifted his eye patch. He said it had been quite a while since he had used it. Now that his left eye was open, he can see so well. In fact, it was so good that he felt almost woozy. He then twisted the bowstring around the arrow and positioned himself to shoot at Shin. When he released the arrow, It spiraled through the air and precisely pierced Shin's left shoulder. Shin couldn't believe that Tenkyu had wrapped the bowstring around the arrow to increase both its range and speed. Tenkyu then remarked that between Shin's ESP and his arrows, it seemed his range was superior. While looking into the distance, Shin thought that Tenkyu was too far away for him to read his thoughts. Tenkyu told him not to glare at him like that. He said he also wanted to kill him and end this. He released another arrow, and this time, it grazed Shin's right shoulder. Meanwhile, due to using his left eye, Tenkyu was starting to feel nauseous. At this point, Shin was also struggling to move his body. So, he desperately tried to think of what he could do, or some kind of edge he might have. Suddenly, Tenkyu jumped and rushed closer to Shin. He attacked him with his bow, causing Shin to step back. But while they were face to face and Shin could barely move, Tenkyu aimed his arrow at him. Shin didn't know what to do and kept telling himself to move. And it happened. Just as Tenkyu released his projectile, Shin managed to escape. Tenkyu wondered how he could run in that condition with his leg in such a state. He said it was impossible. Shin was also shocked that his ability to overwrite his own thoughts worked again. It turned out he could use it more than once. His ability worked by sending electrical signals to the basal ganglia of the brain. It hijacked the target's mind and body for a split second. However, due to the body's inherent defenses, it only worked once on other people. Nevertheless, when his own body emitted the current, no resistance was triggered. This meant that Shin's power could work an unlimited number of times when used on himself. Although Shin didn't fully understand what was happening, he was determined to try again. When Tenkyu jumped to attack him, he thought that finally, he could fight back. He suddenly regained control of his body, allowing him to punch Tenkyu in the face with his right hand. The impact was so powerful that Tenkyu was thrown back and lost a tooth. However, Tenkyu managed to catch that tooth and used it as ammunition for his bow. He said this was his gift to Shin and shot it directly at his head. The impact was tremendous. Tenkyu knew it hurts. He said it was his tooth, and his body was tough. Because of this, Shin thought that merely keeping up with Tenkyu wasn't enough. Even if he pushed his body to its extreme physical limit, he still couldn't move his body faster than Tenkyu. While thinking, Shin seemed to realize something. Instead of commanding his body to move, what if he commanded his mind to function at maximum power? Meanwhile, Tenkyu positioned himself again to strike with his weapon. He asked which one of them would die in the end. But Shin remained focused on his plan. He was curious if his brain could handle it, but he needed to try. He would push his brain to process at peak speed. Tenkyu released his arrow, and it was about to hit Shin's left eye. However, Shin was surprised because suddenly everything became extremely slow. He could see the arrow traveling toward his eye in slow motion. As he pondered and realized what was happening, he laughed because he knew he had won. He managed to catch the arrow, and using Tenkyu's own arrow, he slashed him across his body, even managing to slice off some of his fingers. Shin pointed the arrow at him, but something dripped onto Tenkyu's face, making him curious. He asked if Shin was crying. When he looked at him, he initially wondered if Shin was sad, but it seemed that wasn't it. Rather, Shin appeared afraid to kill. When Tenkyu asked if he was right, Shin replied that he wasn't. While holding his arrow, Shin said that somewhere deep down, he had thought that when it came to this moment, he might be the type to hesitate to kill. However, he wasn't like that. Right now, he felt that there's nothing holding him back from killing Tenkyu. He said he was the type of person who shouldn't be there, and it was so obvious. Therefore, he told Tenkyu to die. Tenkyu responded with no thanks. He managed to attempt a kick, but Shin blocked it. This time, Shin went straight for the kill using the arrow. However, a hand stopped him, and it turned out to be Sakamoto. Shin was completely shocked to see Sakamoto there. Flashing back 30 minutes earlier, Torres mentioned he needed a reading for his horse racing ticket while facing Atari. Heisuke was puzzled when he saw him and asked who he was. Torres had been brought there by order. Oki had sent him to JAA prison, although he didn't want to go at first. According to him, it was safer to keep an endangered fortune teller in prison. He assured that she would be okay there. Oki explained to Torres that the JAA chairman feared someone might obtain her power, which was why they confined her in prison. Nevertheless, someone was apparently attempting to kidnap her. Torres just scratched his head and said she was just a fortune teller. So what's the big deal? He added that even when he draws a great fortune at the shrine, he never wins at the races. Oki explained that this was beyond human understanding. He called her a veritable Laplace's demon. If used correctly, he claimed she could serve as a weapon capable of matching Takamura's level. Therefore, they couldn't allow others to get their hands on her. Back in the present, Torres could be seen carrying Atari. He questioned what was wrong with all of them, and why were they relying on that fortune-telling baloney. He said that's how you let the big wins get away. By this point, he had already taken down Heisuke and the guard Hoshi. Heisuke, lying on the ground, tried to stop him, saying her luck had run out so they should leave Atari alone. Hoshi couldn't believe what he was saying. Torres asked him if he thought everyone gets to choose how they want to live. He said he was just like that woman, playing the hand dealt to them. If you want to change fate, he said, you need to gamble. Atari, wearing Shin's name tag, became worried. Suddenly, the ceiling above them cracked, and Sakamoto jumped down from it. He landed exactly where Torres was standing. He kicked him forcefully in the face, causing Torres to be thrown far away. Heisuke was shocked to see this and asked what he was doing there. He explained that at the store, they had received an emergency signal from Shin's name tag GPS. Worried, he traced it until he arrived there. Atari called it a lucky item, which surprised Sakamoto. When he searched for Shin's whereabouts, Heisuke suddenly approached and said that Shin was down below. He mentioned that Shin had said he would quit their store and return to his assassin life. So, he begged Sakamoto to bring Shin back. Sakamoto didn't respond when he heard this. Meanwhile, Hoshi joined their conversation, unable to believe he was Taro Sakamoto. She said she knew it wasn't her place to say this, but if he left that girl, she would be in danger. We then see the massive crack in the wall caused by Torres's impact. Torres spoke and said Sakamoto shouldn't worry. He told him to go to his friend, saying he would forgive him for what he did. However, if he left, he would take the girl. And if that black-haired kid and the girl gave him trouble, then he would kill them. So, Sakamoto spoke to Heisuke, telling him to hold the fort for 10 minutes. He handed him his gun and said he would bring Shin back. Heisuke was overjoyed to see his gun, as was Pisuke. Atari was impressed when she saw them. She said that bird and that man were powerful lucky items for each other. She could sense an extremely powerful aura of safety and good energy from them. Torres asked Sakamoto if he thought that kid could hold out for 10 minutes. He added that's what you'd call a gamble. Sakamoto replied that it wasn't a gamble, but a sure thing. He said he trusted his friends. He quickly left and went to the lower level to find Shin. He arrived just in time to see Shin on top of Tenkyu with a blade pointed at him, so he grabbed his hand to stop him. When Shin noticed him, he asked what he was doing there. Sakamoto had his name tag with him, which confused Shin. He simply replied that they were leaving. He said Shin didn't belong there. Shin didn't respond immediately, and suddenly Tenkyu coughed up blood. His mouth filled with blood, and he struggled to breathe. So Sakamoto quickly pulled Shin back. He listened to Tenkyu's chest and realized the wound had punctured his lungs. He wouldn't last long like this, so they needed to compress the wound. He asked for the work belt under the pipes behind them. Shin was shocked and refused. He said Tenkyu should die. He explained that Tenkyu had planned to target Aoi and Hana. Why should they save a slime bag like him? Sakamoto simply answered that it was for Shin's own good. He wouldn't let him become a killer. Shin stopped and said there was no use in that. While kneeling on the floor, he admitted he wasn't who they thought he was. He wasn't a good person. Sakamoto approached him and patted his back, saying he knew. Shin began to cry when Sakamoto told him not to worry. He said he knew what kind of person Shin was. The scene shifted to a flashback to show a meeting of assassins from before. Sakamoto was introduced to the group as formerly part of JAA Special Forces. Though he was new, the man could vouch for his skills. Sakamoto suddenly noticed something there. It was explained that they had caught someone sniffing around. He wouldn't admit who he was working for, so they were planning to ice him. Sakamoto approached him, and the kid begged for help as he called him Jerkface. It was Shin, who was only 13 years old at the time. Sakamoto, who was only 19 years old then, couldn't believe it. They pointed their guns at young Shin and tried to force him to admit what he was doing lurking around there. They called him a snot-nosed brat, but he still wouldn't talk. The group leader told them to stop. He said they should just ice him and be done with it. Sakamoto remained quiet while Shin thought that it had been 4 years since he escaped from the lab. Just when he had found the trail to him, he couldn't accept dying there. Those present laughed at him because he had gone quiet. One of them asked if he was afraid of guns. So Shin just replied, "Whatever, dude." In his mind, he wondered how he could escape from there. He suddenly asked if all the assassins there had weapons. He read their thoughts and learned what they were carrying. One had a Glock 17, another had a knife, while one claimed he himself was a stun gunman. Shin noticed Sakamoto when he thought that he wasn't carrying any weapon that day. Because of that, Shin quickly moved and approached him. He held a knife to Sakamoto's throat. He had taken the knife from one of the assassins there. They asked what that noob was doing. Shin was pleased because Sakamoto was a moron without a weapon. He said he shouldn't even try and resist. He could easily read his thoughts. However, Sakamoto suddenly grabbed his hair, causing the blade to point at Shin's neck instead. Shin thought he was dead, but those were just Sakamoto's thoughts. He was puzzled when Shin suddenly collapsed, even though he hadn't done anything yet. Others were curious about what he did, and they couldn't understand what happened. Sakamoto just picked up young Shin and said he would take care of disposing of him. He just asked to borrow a body bag. After he left and the door closed, the assassins inside thought there was something fishy about that new guy. One of them said to ignore it. If a man was that tough, they shouldn't question him. Elsewhere, Nagumo was talking to Sakamoto. When he asked how he was doing, Sakamoto said he had infiltrated the group. Nagumo asked if he had gotten into any fights. He answered no. Out of nowhere, Nagumo suddenly shared that Shishiba really hated onions. He had put shaoyapan sauce in his food, and he spat it out. Shishiba threatened that if he did that again, he was dead. Sakamoto said if that's all he had to say, he would hang up the phone. Nagumo suddenly said that Mr. Yatsumura was confirming his mission. Sakamoto mentioned that the target was a former JAA member. He was guilty of leaking classified info and was hiding somewhere in that city. The mission was to find and ice him. So, he would start hitting up regular shady groups. Sound good, Nagumo replied. But he reminded him not to be too obvious. Shin emerged from the body bag and wondered, just as Sakamoto hung up the phone. Shin yawned and pondered. He was very surprised that he wasn't dead yet. He recognized Sakamoto, who asked him why he had targeted him. He simply answered because he had no weapon. When Sakamoto asked how he knew, Shin admitted he could read minds, including what he was thinking right now. Shin observed his reaction. Usually, when people learned of his ability, they thought it was freaky and creepy. So he expected this to be the part where Sakamoto would freak out. However, Sakamoto just kept a poker face and said "oh," which Shin hadn't expected. He wondered what was wrong with him, not freaking out about the fact that he could read his thoughts. Sakamoto just said he made a good choice, then asked him to leave. Young Shin told him to shut up, calling him a dirty assassin. He said he wouldn't be bossed around. Sakamoto told him to go to the police and they would take care of him. Someone his age wouldn't last long in those circles. Shin told him to shut up again and said he was looking for someone. He had been searching alone for years. Sakamoto just replied, "Is that so?" He hoped Shin would find them. Shin explained that since he was 6 years old, he had almost died many times. However, Sakamoto seemed uninterested. Shin became curious about what was wrong with him, as he couldn't get his attention no matter how hard he tried. It was so annoying. Sakamoto then noticed something below, a parked car and people surrounding it. Shin asked if they were his target. Sakamoto was surprised he was still there and told him to leave. Shin just smiled and suddenly shouted to get the attention of the people below. They became alarmed and wondered if he was an enemy. They decided that whatever gang he was from, they had to kill him. Sakamoto became worried, while Shin escaped and just laughed, wishing him good luck. The men quickly climbed to the rooftop and found Sakamoto. They said they should kill him. Shin was laughing while running, but his smile didn't last long and disappeared. He became sad when he remembered the files he found in the lab. 13 years ago, a man named Tasuku Ando had left him at the lab when he was just a baby, then vanished. He was curious if that Tasuku Ando was his father. He happened to pass by a father and child. He thought the reason why nobody would accept him was that they weren't connected by blood. If only he could find his real father. Suddenly, someone approached and pointed a gun at him. They recognized him as an associate of the man with glasses. Shin became worried when they invited him to come back to their office with them. However, Sakamoto landed impressively on their car, causing it to be destroyed. He spoke to Shin using his thoughts and told him to get down. Shin was surprised because Sakamoto had hit those two men using the wheel and license plate of the car. Fortunately, Shin had ducked and avoided it due to Sakamoto's warning. Because he survived, Sakamoto thought this proved he really could read others' thoughts. Shin was impressed because he thought Sakamoto was so tough. However, Shin suddenly realized that if he had been lying about his ability, he would probably be dead by now. Sakamoto took off his coat and wrapped it around his hand holding the gun. He said he was part of JAA, and his mission was to kill someone. He pointed it at the man and said if he tried to cover for him, then he would kill him. The man was puzzled that they had a direct target and was curious about who it was. Because of this, Sakamoto asked if he knew Tasuku Ando, a former JAA researcher. Shin was shocked when he heard his father's name, but the man on the ground just replied that he had never heard about him. Sakamoto offered to help jog his memory, but Shin stopped him because the man really didn't know anything. Sakamoto looked at him, while Shin thought that if he accompanied him, he might find his father. He suddenly suggested that Sakamoto take him along on his mission. He said he would help him find his target. They both thought they could use each other.